Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of medieval Europe's most overlooked and absolutely brutal workplaces, the candle workshop. Picture this. It's barely dawn. The sky still that bruised purple-gray of early morning. And you're standing outside a narrow timber-framed building wedged between a butcher's shop and a tannery. The air already smells like death and rendering fat, and you haven't even gone inside yet. You can hear the crackling of fires within, see smoke curling from the chimney hole in the roof, and through the warped wooden door, you catch glimpses of figures moving in the amber gloom. Your stomach twists. You're about to spend the next 12 to 14 hours making candles, and honestly, you probably won't make it to lunch without either passing out, vomiting, or seriously reconsidering every life choice that brought you here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you in Tokyo at 3 a.m.? London at bedtime? Somewhere in Kansas at a perfectly reasonable hour? I love seeing where in the world you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the door, and the heat hits you like a physical wall. It's not just warm, it's oppressive, thick, the kind of heat that makes your lungs work harder with every breath. The workshop is maybe 20 feet wide and 30 feet deep, with a dirt floor that's been packed down by decades of foot traffic until it's nearly as hard as stone. Centuries of spilled tallow have left dark, greasy stains everywhere. The ceiling is low, maybe 7 feet at its highest point, blackened by years of smoke that never quite finds its way out the roof hole. Wooden beams crisscross overhead, festooned with cobwebs and what you desperately hope is just soot. 3 large cauldrons dominate the center of the room, each suspended over its own fire pit by iron tripods. They're already bubbling with something that looks like murky dishwater but smells exponentially worse. The fires beneath them crackle and pop, fed by a young boy probably no more than 10, who keeps shuttling between the flames and a woodpile near the back wall. His face is smudged with ash, his eyes watery from the smoke. He doesn't even glance at you. "You're late," comes a voice from the shadows. You turn to find Master Benedict, the head chandler, wiping his hands on an apron so stained it's impossible to tell what color it originally was. He's a stocky man in his 40s, with forearms like twisted rope and hands that are permanently discolored from years of handling hot wax and caustic lye. His face is florid, whether from the heat or from perpetual irritation. You can't tell. Probably both. Late? You manage. But the church bells only just. If you're not here before the bells, you're late. He cuts you off. The fires need tending from the moment there's enough light to see by. The tallow doesn't render itself. Did they teach you nothing at your previous masters? Here's the thing, you don't have a previous master. You're new to this entire craft, having been sent here by your father who owes Benedict a favor, possibly paid him to take you on. You're still not entirely clear on that arrangement. Either way, Benedict seems to be operating under the assumption that you already know what you're doing, which is medieval workplace culture in a nutshell. No orientation, no training manual, no friendly HR person to show you where the bathroom is. Not that there's a bathroom. By the way, there's a bucket in the alley. You're welcome. I'll learn quickly. Master Benedict, you say, trying to sound confident. He snorts. We'll see. Put this on. He tosses you a leather apron that's stiff with accumulated grease and other substances you don't want to identify. And these, a pair of cloth wraps for your hands follow. They're meant to protect you from burns, though they're so thin and worn you suspect they'll be about as effective as tissue paper. You tie the apron on, and immediately feel the weight of it, not just the physical weight, but the symbolic one. This apron marks you as the lowest person in this workshop hierarchy. There's Master Benedict at the top, of course. Then there's Thomas, the journeyman chandler, who you spot now at the far end of the workshop, carefully arranging finished candles on a drying rack. He's maybe 25, lean and efficient in his movements, and he shoots you a look that's equal parts pity and amusement. Below him is Peter, an apprentice in his 4th year, who's currently stirring one of the cauldrons with a long wooden paddle. He doesn't even acknowledge your existence. And finally, there's young Simon, the fire tender, who at least seems relieved that there's now someone below him in the pecking order. First things first, Benedict says, walking toward the nearest cauldron. You need to understand tallow. It's the foundation of everything we do here. This, he gestures to the bubbling mess in the pot, is sheep tallow, fat rendered from sheep carcasses. We get it from the butcher next door, usually within hours of slaughter. The fresher, the better. You peer into the cauldron and immediately wish you hadn't. The surface is rolling with a slow, viscous boil, and the smell is indescribable. It's part rancid meat, part burned hair, part something sweetly putrid that makes your throat close up. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually got used to smells like this or just learned to ignore their body's desperate gag reflex. But either way, you're currently failing at both. The smell bothers you? Benedict asks, though it's not really a question. You'll adapt, or you won't, and you'll leave, and I'll tell your father you're unsuited for honest work. Honest work, right? There's something almost funny about that. Standing here in what amounts to a medieval hotbox of animal fat fumes. But you swallow hard and nod. I'll adapt. Good. Now, see how Peter's stirring? Benedict points to the apprentice, who's moving his paddle in slow, methodical circles. The tallow has to be kept moving or it'll burn on the bottom and ruin the entire batch. Burned tallow makes candles that smoke black and smell even worse than they already don't, trust me. Our neighbors already complain enough. Last year, the cobbler 2 doors down filed a grievance with the guild about the smell driving away his customers. What happened? You ask. Benedict's expression darkens. Cost me 3 silver pennies in fines and a formal apology to the street wardens. All because he couldn't appreciate that without our candles. He'd be cobbling boots in the dark. He shakes his head. The guild takes neighbor complaints seriously. Too seriously, if you ask me. But that's why we're careful. No burning the tallow. No letting the fires get too hot. No dumping waste scraps in the street where they'll attract dogs and rats. Well, more rats than usual. He moves to the second cauldron, this one filled with something slightly different in color. This is pig tallow. Burns a bit smokier than sheep, but it's cheaper, so we use it for our common candles, the ones we sell to taverns and anyone who can't afford better. The third pot there, he nods toward the back. That's where we'll do beef tallow later. Finest burning of all the animal fats, but also the most expensive. Your head is already swimming with information, and you've been here less than 10 minutes. Sheep, pig, beef, different tallows, different prices, different burning qualities. and you haven't even started making actual candles yet. Your job today, Benedict says, is to learn by watching and by doing the simple tasks. You'll tend the fires with Simon. You'll stir the tallow when Peter needs a break. And you'll fetch whatever Thomas or I need without complaint or delay. Understood? Understood, Master Benedict. And one more thing. He leans in closer, and you smell the onions he must have eaten for breakfast. In this workshop, we don't waste anything. Not a drop of tallow, not a scrap of wick material, not a moment of daylight. Candles are light itself, packaged and sold, and light is precious. If you spill tallow, you'll pay for it from your meals. If you ruin a batch through carelessness, you'll work extra hours to make up the loss. This isn't a bakery where a burned loaf just means less bread for dinner. Our mistakes cost silver. Remember that. You nod, mouth dry. Right then. Simon, show him how to keep the fires at the proper height. And just like that, your education begins. Simon, the 10-year-old fire tender, becomes your first teacher in the arcane art of medieval candle making. He shows you how to judge the fire's heat by the color of the coals. Red like a robin's breast is too cool. White-yellow like summer butter is too hot. And how to add wood in small pieces rather than large logs that would create temperature spikes. Master Benedict gets fierce angry if the fires go wrong. Simon whispers, glancing nervously toward where the chandler is now discussing something with Thomas. Last month, the boy before you Robert lit the fire under the beeswax pot get too hot, and the whole batch seized up, went all grainy and unusable. Master made him leave that very day. Just sent him back to his family with nothing. Nothing? You ask. No pay? Simon looks at you like you've just asked if the sky is made of pudding. We don't get pay. We get room and board. And learning. The pay comes later, after we're journeymen. If we make it that far. Not when. The medieval workplace had no guarantees, no safety nets. You could spend 7 years as an apprentice, even years of your youth, of your strength, and still end up with nothing if you couldn't pass the guild's tests or if your master decided you weren't worth keeping. The morning wears on. You feed fires. You wipe sweat from your face with your sleeve, only to realize you're just spreading soot and grime around. The heat is relentless. It's not even summer, it's October. Technically autumn, but inside this workshop, it might as well be high July. Your shirt is soaked through within an hour. Your eyes burn from the smoke that seems to swirl everywhere except out the roof hole where it's supposed to go. Around mid-morning, Benedict calls you over to the stirring station. Peter needs to use the privy. He says flatly, take over stirring. Keep the same pace he was using. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't speed up. Just maintain. Peter hands you the pad lights heavier than it looks. The wood worn smooth by countless hands and disappears out the back door. You position yourself where he was standing and begin to stir. The motion seems simple enough at first. Just circles, keeping the tallow moving, preventing it from settling and burning. But after 5 minutes, your shoulders are protesting. After 10, your arms are genuinely aching. The paddle wants to stick in the thicker parts of the tallow, requiring you to push harder. Then it breaks free suddenly and you have to control the momentum. The heat radiating from the cauldron is intense on your face and chest. Sweat drips from your nose into the bubbling fat. Hopefully that doesn't ruin anything. After what feels like an eternity but is probably only 20 minutes, Peter returns. He takes the paddle without a word, and you stagger back, rolling your shoulders, flexing your fingers. Your hands are already developing blisters where the paddle's shaft rubbed against them. That's just stirring, Thomas says, peering beside you. His voice isn't unkind, just matter of fact. Wait until you're dipping candles for 8 hours straight. That's when you discover muscles you didn't know you had, and every single one of them will hurt. He's trying to prepare you, in his way, or maybe he's just stating facts. Either way, you're beginning to understand why Master Benedict seemed so skeptical about your ability to handle this work. The truly wild thing is that all of this heat and stench and laborious just to prepare the tallow. You haven't even started making candles yet. That's coming next. And based on the knowing looks the others keep exchanging, you get the feeling that the actual candle-making process is going to make everything you've experienced so far seem like a gentle warm-up. Outside, somewhere beyond these smoke-stained walls, the city is waking up properly. You can hear the calls of street vendors, the clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones, the church bells marking the hour. Normal life, continuing as always. And here you are, trapped in what amounts to a medieval sweatshop, learning that the simple candle, that thing everyone takes for granted, requires this much heat, this much stench, this much casual misery to create. Welcome to the candle workshop. You've been here 3 hours. Only 9 or 10 more to go until sunset. You're definitely not going to make it. By midday, you've graduated from fire tending to what Master Benedict cheerfully calls the real work, and by real work, he means you're about to get intimately acquainted with the single most disgusting aspect of candle making, rendering raw animal fat into usable tallow. Peter leads you to a back corner of the workshop you hadn't noticed before, probably because your brain was trying to protect you by limiting the sensory information it processed. There, piled in wooden crates and covered with stained cloth, are chunks of raw animal fat, not the clean, white blocks you might be imagining. No, these are ragged pieces of fatty tissue, still streaked with blood, bits of meat clinging to them, membranes and connective tissue dangling like some kind of butcher's nightmare. The smell is immediate and overwhelming, raw meat on the edge of spoiling, mixed with the metallic tang of blood and something earthier, mustier, that you'll later learn is just the fundamental smell of sheep. This arrived from the butcher this morning, Peter says, poking at the pile with a wooden stick. Fresh from yesterday's slaughter. We need to get it rendering today, or it'll start to turn. And turned fat makes candles that smell like death itself. Well, more like death than they already do. You stare at the pile. All of this? Today? All of this. He's already rolling up his sleeves, which you notice are permanently stained a yellowish brown that no amount of washing will ever remove. Come on. We need to chop it into smaller pieces first. The smaller the pieces, the faster and more completely they render. He hands you a Cleavra heavy, worn blade with a wooden handle that's dark with absorbed fat. Then he pulls out a massive wooden chopping block, its surface scarred with thousands of cuts, its grain so saturated with old fat that it gleams dully in the firelight. Historians still argue whether medieval chandlers had specific contracts with butchers for fat delivery, or whether they had to compete for scraps at the slaughterhouse. But what's not debatable is that this fat needed to be processed quickly. Preservation techniques were limited, and spoiled fat was worthless or worse, actively harmful to your candle-making reputation. Peter grabs a handful of the fatty tissue and slaps it onto the block. Watch. You want chunks about yay big, he demonstrates, cutting the fat into rough cubes maybe an inch across. Nothing too small or it'll just melt away to nothing. Nothing too big or it won't render properly. The cleaver comes down with practiced efficiency. Thwack, thwack, thwack. 3 cuts, and he's got a dozen usable pieces. He hands you the cleaver. Your turn. You grab a piece of fat. It's cold, slippery, disgustingly yielding under your fingers and place it on the block. The first swing of the cleaver is tentative, and the blade barely penetrates. The second is too enthusiastic, and you nearly chop through into the block itself. The third is somewhere in between, and you manage to produce something that vaguely resembles the chunks Peter made. Good enough, Peter says, which you suspect is generous. Keep going. We need to process about 40 pounds before we can start the render. 40 pounds. You look at the pile in the crates. 40 pounds is a lot of fat, a lot of chopping, a lot of touching this cold, dead tissue with your hands. The cloth wraps you're wearing help a bit, but fat and blood seep through fabric with enthusiastic efficiency. So you chop, and chop, and chop some more. Your shoulder starts to ache from the repetitive motion. The cleaver grows heavy in your hand. Fat splatters onto your apron, onto your shirt, onto your face at one point when you bring the blade down at a weird angle. The smell embeds itself in your nose, in your throat, until you can taste it. After what feels like hours but is probably closer to one, you've created a sizable mound of chopped fat pieces. Your hands are cramping. Your back hurts from hunching over the block. And Peter just nods and says, "Right, that's enough for the first batch. Help me carry it to the cauldron." You scoop the chunks into a large wooden bucket, trying not to think about how slippery everything is, how your hands now feel like they'll never be clean again, and follow Peter to the middle cauldron, which has been emptied of the morning's rendered tallow. The fire beneath it has been built up fresh, and the cauldron itself still radiates heat from its previous use. In it goes, Peter says, and you both dump the chunks into the pot. They land with a wet, meaty sound that makes your stomach lurch. Now we add water just enough to keep it from burning before the fat starts releasing its own liquid. He dips a bucket into a barrel of water near the wall and sloshes it into the cauldron, maybe a gallon or so. The fat chunks bob and float, looking disturbingly like some kind of medieval stew, which, in a sense, it is a stew of animal tissue, slowly breaking down into its component parts. The trick, Peter explains, grabbing the stirring paddle, is to keep the heat moderate. Too hot, and the fat burns. Too cool, and it takes forever and doesn't render completely. You want a gentle simmer, just bubbles breaking the surface every few seconds. He begins to stir, and you watch as the heat gradually does its work. First, nothing seems to happen. The chunks just float there, looking unappetizing and producing a smell that makes the earlier tallow boiling seem almost pleasant by comparison. But after 10 minutes or so, you notice changes. The fat is beginning to melt, turning translucent at the edges. The water in the pot is taking on a cloudy, grayish appearance. Small bubbles start to rise and pop. See that? Peter points with the paddle. That's the fat liquefying. Over the next few hours, all these solid chunks will break down. The pure fat will separate and float to the top. The water and impurities, blood, bits of meat, membranes, all the nasty stuff will sink or float as scum. And then what? And then we skim off the scum, ladle out the pure tallow, and let it cool and solidify. Tomorrow, we'll melt it again, second rendering, which purifies it even more. The really good chandlers do 3 renderings, but Master Benedict says 2 is enough for our grade of candles. Peter pauses. The really fancy workshops that make church candles and such, they render 5 or 6 times, until the tallow is nearly white and barely smells at all. But that's not us. You're learning that candle making, like everything else in medieval life, exists on a spectrum of quality. At the bottom, you have rush lights, just dried rushes dipped in whatever leftover grease is available, used by the poorest peasants. They barely qualify as light sources, burning fast and smoky and dim. Then you have basic tallow candles. What this workshop primarily produces: functional, affordable-ish, but definitely not pleasant. Above that are fine tallow candles, rendered multiple times, used by merchants and minor nobility. And at the very top, there are beeswax candles, which you haven't even worked with yet, but which everyone speaks of in hushed, reverent tones. The morning stretches into afternoon, and you take your turn at the stirring. The smell has evolved from raw meat to something more complex and arguably worse: hot meat, rendering fat, the protein breakdown odor that makes you think of every cooking smell gone wrong. Your eyes water. Your throat feels coated with grease. At one point, you have to step away and stick your head out the back door just to breathe air that isn't saturated with fat particles. First day is always the worst, Thomas says, appearing beside you with a cup of small beer. Here, drink this. It helps. You take the cup gratefully. The beer is weak, slightly sour, but it cuts through the taste in your mouth. Does the smell ever get better? You get used to it, Thomas says, which isn't the same as yes. After a few months, you stop really noticing it. Or maybe you do notice, but your body stops screaming about it. Hard to say. He leans against the door frame, watching the street outside where normal people are doing normal things. I've been doing this for 6 years. Started when I was 12. Finished my apprenticeship last year, and now I'm saving money to pay for my guild examination. If I pass, I'll be a master chandler myself. Maybe open my own workshop. Is it worth it? You ask, and immediately regret the question. Sounds too much like doubt, like weakness. But Thomas just shrugs. Worth is a strange word. It's a trade. It's employment. It's better than starving, better than breaking your back in a field, better than a lot of other things. Is it pleasant? No, but pleasant isn't really the point of work. Is it? He takes the cup back from you. Come on. The scum needs skimming. Back at the cauldron, the rendering has progressed significantly. The surface of the liquid is covered with a foamy, grayish-brown layer of scum, all the impurities rising to the top. Peter hands you a shallow ladle with holes in it, a medieval skimmer. Scoop it off and dump it in that bucket. He instructs, pointing to a bucket in the corner. We'll use it for soap making later. The soap makers will pay a few pennies for it. You lean over the cauldron, trying to avoid breathing too deeply, and begin skimming. The scum is hot, steaming, and looks exactly like something you'd expect to find in a medieval horror movie. Bits of connective tissue, coagulated blood, foam, and other unidentifiable materials come up with each scoop. You dump it in the bucket, and it lands with a wet splat that makes your skin crawl. Skim after skim after skim. The process is hypnotic in its monotony. Your arm develops a rhythm. Dip, lift, dump, repeat. Dip, lift, dump, repeat. The heat from the cauldron makes your face flush and sweat drip from your chin. More fat particles in the air. More grease settling on your skin. Keep going until the surface looks relatively clear. Peter calls from across the workshop, where he's started preparing something else. We want just the golden liquid tallow left. Golden. That's one way to describe it. By the time you're finished skimming, the surface of the cauldron does look clear-era yellowish amber liquid, still bubbling gently, still smelling like concentrated animal essence, but at least no longer covered in obvious chunks of nastiness. Master Benedict comes over to inspect your work. He peers into the cauldron, nods once, then looks into the scum bucket. Not bad. You got most of it. There's still some on the surface sea there, and the rebut for a first attempt. Acceptable. From him, this is apparently high praise. Now it needs to simmer for another hour, then we'll ladle it into the cooling trays. An hour. You're learning that medieval candlemaking operates on timescales that would drive a modern person insane. Everything takes hours. Rendering takes hours. Cooling takes hours. Later, you'll discover that dipping candles takes hours. There are no shortcuts, no microwaves, no efficiency hacks, just heat, time, and manual labor. You spend that hour helping young Simon maintain the fires, learning more about the subtle art of fuel management. Hardwood burns hotter but costs more. Simon explains in his high, piping voice. He's clearly proud to know things you don't. Softwood is cheaper, but you need more of it. Master Benedict buys whatever's cheapest at the time. So sometimes we're burning beech, sometimes oak, sometimes pine. You have to adjust your fire tending based on the wood. It's strange, the amount of knowledge embedded in what seems like such a simple craft. You're realizing that Master Benedict isn't just a man who melts fat for a living's a specialist with years of accumulated expertise about heat management, fat chemistry, fuel economics, and material properties. In a different world, he might have been an engineer or a chemist. In this world, he's a chandler, and that's somehow both more and less than those modern titles suggest. When the hour is up, Benedict and Thomas begin the delicate process of ladling the rendered tallow into large, shallow wooden trays lined with cloth. The tallow pours out in thick, golden streams, steaming in the cooler air of the workshop. It's actually almost beautiful if you can ignore where it came from and what it smells like. This will cool overnight, Benedict explains. Tomorrow, we'll pop it out of the trace. It'll be solid by then, and we'll have blocks of rendered tallow ready for candle making. That's when the real skill comes in. He looks at you, evaluating. You survived the rendering. That's something. Most people can't handle it. Last year, I took on a merchant's son. His father wanted him to learn a useful trade. The boy took one look at the raw fat and vomited. Went home before noon and never came back. You feel an absurd pride at this. You didn't vomit. You didn't run away. You chopped fat. You stirred boiling tallow. You skimmed scum. And you're still standing. Your standards for success have adjusted dramatically over the course of a single day. The afternoon continues with more of the same, another batch of fat to chop, another cauldron of tallow to tend, more fires to maintain. Your body settles into a kind of exhausted rhythm. Your nose has either adapted to the smell or simply given up on sending distress signals to your brain. You're not sure which. As the light outside begins to fade, the sun setting somewhere beyond the smoky workshop walls, Master Benedict finally calls an end to the workday. Right? Good enough. Simon, bank the fires for the night. Peter, Thomas, cover the cauldrons and make sure everything's secure. You, he nods at you. Help with the cleanup. Then you can go. Cleanup involves sweeping the workshop floor, though sweeping is generosity, mostly just pushing dirt and fat scraps around, washing the tools in a bucket of cold water, and hanging the paddles and ladles on their wall hooks. Your hands are raw, your back aches, and you're fairly certain you'll never feel clean again. You'll sleep in the loft, Benedict says, pointing to a ladder in the corner that leads to a space above the workshop. Apprentices and the journeymen sleep here. I've got a proper house 2 streets over. Be back at dawn. Earlier if you can manage it. You climb the ladder and find yourself in a low-ceilinged space that smells, unsurprisingly, like tallow. There are 4 straw pallets arranged on the wooden floor, and a single small window that lets in the last gray light of evening. Peter and Thomas are already up here, and Simon scurries up behind you. First day done, Thomas says, pulling off his stained shirt. You did all right, better than most. You collapse onto the empty pallet. Every muscle in your body is screaming. Your hands throb. Your lungs feel coated with grease. And tomorrow, you'll wake up and do it all again. And the day after that. And the day after that. For years, this is medieval work life. No 8-hour days, no weekends, no vacation time. Just endless repetition until either your body breaks, or you learn the skills well enough to become valuable, or you give up and go back to whatever life you left behind. Outside, the city is settling into evening. Somewhere, people are eating dinner, telling stories, living lives that don't revolve around boiling animal fat. And here you are, lying on a straw mattress above a candle workshop, smelling like a rendering plant, wondering how anyone survived this. The answer, of course, is that many people didn't survive it, at least not with their health intact. But some did. Some learned the craft, mastered it, made a living from it. And maybe, just maybe, if you can endure the smell and the heat and the sheer brutal monotony of it all, you'll be one of them. But right now, on your first day, that possibility seems very, very far away. Morning arrives far too early, announced by Master Benedict banging on the workshop door below and shouting something about lazy apprentices. You peel yourself off the straw pallet, your body protesting in ways you didn't know were possible. Your shoulders are stiff from yesterday's stirring. Your hands are blistered from the cleaver and paddle. And there's a spectacular bruise forming on your hip from where you bumped into the cauldron tripod at some point, though you honestly can't remember when. Peter is already up, splashing water on his face from a bucket near the window. You'll hurt less in a few weeks, he says, which is not encouraging because it implies you'll still hurt, just less. Come on, today's dipping day. Dipping day. You've heard the others mention it, always with a certain tone, not quite dread, but definitely resignation. You're about to discover why. Down in the workshop, the rendered tallow from yesterday has cooled into solid blocks in the trays. They're pale yellow, waxy, still faintly warm to the touch when Benedict has you help lift them out. Each block is maybe 20 pounds, dense and heavy, and you stack them carefully on a shelf along the back wall. This, Benedict announces, gesturing to the blocks with something approaching pride, is what everything was for yesterday. Good quality tallow, properly rendered. Now we transform it into candles. He points to one of the cauldrons, which has been filled with chunks of already rendered tallow from previous days. First, we melt it again, but gently this time, just enough to liquefy it. Too hot, and it becomes too thin to coat properly. Too cool, and it won't stick to the wicks at all. Thomas is already tending this melting pot, stirring occasionally, testing the consistency by letting a bit drip from his paddle. Looking good, he murmurs, more to himself than anyone else. Right then, Benedict continues, "You need to understand wicks before you can understand dipping. Come here." He leads you to a workbench near the window, the only spot in the workshop that gets decent natural light where bundles of what looks like dried grass or reeds are stacked. "These are rushes," he explains, picking one up. "Not just any rushes. Mind you, these are from the marshes south of the city, cut at specific times of year when they're at the right moisture content. Too dry, and they crumble. Too green, and they don't burn properly." You examine the rush. This may be 2 feet long, pale green-brown, hollow in the center. It doesn't look like much. The common people just dip these directly in grease and call it a day. Benedict says with obvious disdain. "Rush lights. Cheap, fast-burning, smoky. We make proper candles, which means proper wicks." He pulls out a different bundle actual cord, what looks like twisted cotton or linen. These are imported from the Low Countries. Expensive, but necessary. Cotton and linen burn more steadily than rush. Don't produce as much smoke. Don't collapse as they burn. He demonstrates, holding up a length of wick about 18 inches long. For a standard tallow candle, we use 3-ply cotton. See how it's braided? That's important. A straight cord burns irregularly, gutters and drips. A braided wick burns straight and true, pulling the melted tallow up through capillary action as it burns. You nod, trying to absorb this. It's fascinating. Actually, how much science is embedded in something as simple as a candle wick? Historians still argue whether medieval chandlers understood the physics of what they were doing or just followed traditional practices that happened to work. But either way, they'd figured out through trial and error what modern chemistry would later explain. The wick needs to have the right thickness, the right material, the right construction to match the fuel it's burning. Now, Benedict says, before we can dip wicks, we need to prepare them. That's your job for this morning. You're going to cut wicks to length and attach them to the dipping rods. He shows you the dipping rod's wooden dowels about 2 feet long, maybe an inch in diameter, with small notches cut at regular intervals along their length. Each rod holds 6 wicks. He explains, you tie a wick at each notch, making sure they're tight and secure. If a wick falls off during dipping, it's wasted the tallow, the time, everything. You're handed a bundle of wick cord and a small knife. Your task: cut the cord into 18-inch lengths. Tie each length to a notch on a dipping rod. Repeat until you've prepared 50 rods. 50 rods, 6 wicks each, 300 wicks total, 300 future candles. The cutting is easy enough once you establish a rhythm, but the tying proves surprisingly fiddly. The notches are small, the cord wants to slip, and Benedict has very specific ideas about what constitutes a proper knot. Your first 3 attempts are rejected. Tighter, he barks. That'll slip the moment it touches hot tallow. You try again, and again. By the 10th rod, you're getting the hang of a specific loop and twist that locks the wick in place without using so much cord that you're wasting material. By the 20th rod, your fingers are moving automatically. By the 30th, you understand why this is apprentice work. It's tedious, requires attention to detail, but doesn't need years of expertise. While you work, you watch Thomas and Peter prepare for the actual dipping. They've set up what looks like a drying racka wooden frame with horizontal bars at different heights near the back of the workshop. And Thomas has brought the tallow in the melting cauldron to exactly the right temperature, testing it repeatedly, adjusting the fire beneath it with minute precision. Temperature is everything in dipping, Thomas explains when he notices you watching. Too hot, and the tallow just runs off the wick and you get nowhere. Too cool, and it clumps unevenly, makes lumpy candles. You want it just at the melting point, maybe slightly above, thick enough to coat, thin enough to be smooth. Finally, you finish the last dipping rod. Your fingers are cramping from the repetitive knot tying, but you feel a small sense of accomplishment. Benedict inspects a few rods at random, tugs on the wicks to test their security, and grunts approval. These'll do. Now watch carefully. Thomas is going to demonstrate proper dipping technique. Thomas picks up one of your prepared rods, holding it horizontally with both hands. The 6 wicks dangle down, swaying slightly. He carries it to the melting cauldron and, in one smooth motion, lowers the wicks into the liquid tallow. They disappear beneath the golden surface. He counts 1, 2, 3 inch, then lifts the rod straight up. The wicks emerge coated in a thin layer of tallow that immediately begins to cool and harden in the air. The coating is barely visible, maybe the thickness of a hair. First dip, Thomas says calmly. He carries the rod to the drying rack and hangs it on one of the bars, the wicks dangling freely. Now we wait for it to cool completely before the second dip. How long? You ask. 5 minutes, maybe 10, depends on the weather. Colder days, the tallow sets faster, which is good. Summer is miserable for dipping, takes forever between coats. He's already picking up a second rod. That's why we work in rotation. By the time you've dipped all 50 rods once, the first one is ready for its second dip. And suddenly you understand the process. This isn't about dipping one candle to completion and then starting the next. It's about continuous rotation. Dip, hang, wait, dip the next, hang, wait, and by the time you've worked through all 50 rods, you circle back to the beginning and start the second round of dipping. Each pass adds a thin layer of tallow. Gradually, slowly, the wicks transform into candles. How many dips does it take? You ask. For a standard candle, maybe 20 to 30, Peter says. He's preparing another cauldron now, melting a different batch of tallow. For thick church candles, could be 50 or more. Each dip adds maybe a millimeter of thickness. It's not fast. 20 to 30 dips. 50 rods. You do the math. Even if each dip and hang cycle takes 2 minutes, which seems optimistic looking at hours of repetitive motion. Dip, lift, hang, walk to the next rod, pick it up, carry it to the cauldron, dip, lift, hang, over and over, for the entire day. Your turn, Benedict says, and your stomach drops. Start with rod number 1. Should be cool by now. You approach the rack nervously and lift down the first rod Thomas dipped. The wicks now have a barely perceptible coating of hardened tallow. Stiff instead of limp, you carry the rod to the cauldron. Position yourself like Thomas did, and lower the wicks into the liquid. Steady, Benedict warns. Don't splash. Don't bang them against the side of the pot. In and out smooth. You count to 3. The tallow feels hot even through the rising steam and lift. The wicks emerge with a slightly thicker coating now, the second layer adding to the first. You carry the rod back to the rack. Hang it carefully and reach for the next one. Good, Thomas says. Keep that pace. Nice and steady. No rushing. So you settle into the rhythm. Dip and hang. Dip and hang. The first complete rotation through all 50 rods takes maybe an hour and a half. You're slow, careful, terrified of making a mistake. But by the time you circle back to rod number 1 for the third dip, something strange has happened. Your body has found the pattern. Your hands know how to hold the rod, how to lower and lift without splashing, how to hang it without tangling the wicks. Your mind starts to drift, entering a kind of meditative trance. This, you realize, is what most medieval work was like. Not dramatic or exciting, not requiring constant problem solving or creativity, just repetitive physical tasks, done over and over, until they become as natural as breathing. The spinners who turned wool into thread, the weavers who made cloth, the coopers who built barrels, the potters who threw clay, all of them spent their days in similar trances, their hands moving while their minds wandered. Getting the hang of it, Peter observes around the 10th rotation. The candles, because that's what they're becoming now, actual recognizable candles, have grown to maybe the thickness of your little finger. They're still irregular, lumpy in places where you dipped too fast or held the rod at a slight angle, but they're definitely candles. Your shoulders are beginning to ache. The same muscles you used yesterday for stirring are now protesting this different but equally repetitive motion. Lift, dip, lift, hang, lift, dip, lift, hang. The heat from the cauldron is constant on your face and hands. Sweat drips. The smell of hot tallow, which you thought you'd gotten used to, seems stronger today somehow. Or maybe you're just more aware of it because you're leaning directly over the source. Around midday you've lost count of how many rotations you've completed. Benedict brings you a cup of small beer and a chunk of bread. Eat while you work, he instructs. Can't afford to stop for a proper meal when we're mid-dip. The tallow temperature needs constant monitoring. So you learn to eat one-handed, bread clenched in your teeth while you maneuver the dipping rods. The bread is coarse, dark, probably rye mixed with cheaper grains, but it's surprisingly welcome. Your body is burning energy at a ferocious rate, and the food helps. By mid-afternoon, the candles have reached their full thickness, roughly the diameter of your thumb, maybe slightly less. They're beautiful in their way, pale yellow gold, slightly translucent when held up to the light, perfectly cylindrical except where your inexperience created small imperfections. You've made candles, actual, functional candles, out of animal fat and cotton cord and hours of patient dipping. Final step, Benedict says, smoothing and trimming. He shows you how to use a warm, slightly damp cloth to smooth out any obvious lumps or irregularities on the candle surface. The warmth of the cloth slightly melts the outermost layer of tallow, letting you even it out without removing material. Then comes trimming using a sharp knife to cut the wick to the proper length at the top and remove the excess at the bottom where the candle was attached to the rod. Top wick should be about 1/4 inch. Thomas demonstrates. Too short, and it's hard to light. Too long, and it smokes and burns unevenly. Bottom needs to be flat so the candle stands straight or can be mounted properly. You work your way through all 50 rods, smoothing and trimming 300 candles. Your fingers are cramping again, but differently than this morningless sharp pain. More deep ache. By the time you finish the last candle, the light outside has turned that particular golden-orange color that means late afternoon sliding toward evening. Benedict inspects your work, holding candles up to the window, checking their straightness, their uniformity, their weight. He sets aside about 12. These are too lumpy for regular sale. We'll melt them down and redip tomorrow. The rest are acceptable. Not beautiful, but acceptable. They'll burn, and that's what matters. 288 acceptable candles out of 300 attempts. A 96% success rate. You feel absurdly proud, even though you know these are basic tallow candles. The cheapest proper candles available, nothing special. But you made them, with your own hands, through hours of repetitive labor. You transformed animal fat and cotton cord into light. Tomorrow, Benedict says, we'll do another batch. And the day after that, another. You'll dip candles most days, at least for the first year or two. Eventually, you'll develop the muscle memory and the judgment to do it in your sleep. You'll be able to tell just by the weight of the rod how thick the candles have gotten. You'll know by the sound of the tallow bubbling whether the temperature is right. That's when you'll start learning the more advanced techniques. More advanced than this? You ask. Thomas laughs. This is the simplest kind of candle making. Wait until you try molding candles in brass forms, or making beeswax tapers for church altars, or decorated candles with colored wax and carved designs. Or, he grins, making candles in winter, when your fingers are so cold you can barely feel them, but the tallow sets so fast you can barely work it. The workshop is beginning to cool now that the fires are being banked for the evening. You help clean the tools, cover the cauldrons, arrange the finished candles on storage racks where they'll continue to cure for a few days before being sold. Your body moves automatically, exhausted but satisfied in a way you didn't expect. You did well today, Peter says quietly as you're washing paddles together. Better than Robert did his first week. He couldn't maintain the rhythm, kept rushing the early dips and then having to wait too long for the later ones. Made inconsistent candles that Benedict couldn't sell. What happened to him? You ask, remembering Simon's story from yesterday about the boy who ruined the beeswax. Sent home after 3 weeks. His father was angry, paid Benedict a premium to take Robert on, and Benedict had to return most of the money since Robert didn't complete even a month. Peter shrugs. Not everyone can handle it. The monotony breaks some people faster than the hard labor does. That's an interesting observation, and as you climb the ladder to the loft that evening, you turn it over in your mind. The physical difficulty of the work is obvious: the heat, the smell, the repetitive strain on your muscles. But the mental challenge is subtler. How do you maintain focus and care through hours of identical motions? How do you avoid mistakes when your mind is numb with boredom? How do you find satisfaction in creating something so common, so mundane, that most people never even think about where it comes from? These are questions every medieval craftsperson must have grappled with. the baker making his 100th loaf of the day, the cobbler stitching her 20th shoe, the blacksmith hammering out another horseshoe nail. Their work was essential. Civilization literally couldn't function without them, but it was also repetitive, often thankless, occasionally dangerous, and definitely not glamorous. You collapse onto your straw pallet, your hands curled into semi-permanent claws from gripping dipping rods all day. Outside the small window, you can hear the city settling into night. A dog barks somewhere. Cartwheels clatter over cobblestones. Someone is singing drunk, probably, given how off-key it is. And you think about the candles you made today. 288 acceptable candles. If each one burns for maybe 4 hours, that's over 1,000 hours of light you've created. 1,000 hours when someone, somewhere, will be able to see after dark. Read, maybe, or sew, or just sit with their family without being swallowed by darkness. That's not nothing. In a world without electricity, without streetlights, without any way to push back the night except fire, those candles matter. You made light. You made it with your hands, with your endurance, with your willingness to stand in front of a hot cauldron for hours and dip wicks until your arms ached. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the answer to the question of how medieval craftspeople found meaning in repetitive work they understood, in a visceral way that modern people have largely forgotten, how essential their mundane products were. Every candle mattered. Every loaf mattered. Every nail mattered. Tomorrow, you'll make more candles. And the day after that, more still. And gradually, dip by dip, day by day, you'll become someone who knows how to transform fat and wick into light. If you survive the apprenticeship, that is, 3 weeks into your apprenticeship, you're awakened not by Master Benedict's shouting, but by something worse, the sound of heavy boots on the workshop floor below and an unfamiliar voice demanding to see the master's records. Immediately, Peter sits up on his pallet, instantly alert. Guild inspectors, he whispers, and his face has gone pale in the pre-dawn darkness. They're early. That's never good. You scramble down the ladder behind Thomas and Peter, trying to look presentable despite having slept in your work clothes, which, let's be honest, is what everyone does. Below, 2 men in better quality tunics than you've seen in weeks are examining the workshop with expressions of professional suspicion. One is making notes on a wax tablet. The other is lifting candles from yesterday's batch, weighing them in his hand, holding them up to the lantern light. Master Benedict has appeared from somewhere, probably ran here from his house, and he looks more stressed than you've ever seen him. His face is flushed, and there's a slight tremor in his hands as he pulls out a thick ledger book from a locked chest. "Gentlemen," he says, voice steady despite the nerves you can read in his posture. "Everything is in order. As always, you'll find the records complete and accurate." The inspector with the wax tablet doesn't look up. "That's what we're here to verify, Master Benedict. You know the rules. Quarterly inspections, unannounced, by order of the Guild of Chandlers. We've had complaints." "Complaints?" Benedict's voice rises slightly. "From whom? About what?" "Neighbor complaints about smoke and smell." And the inspector fixes Benedict with a hard stare. "Allegations that your candles are underweight, that you've been shorting customers." The workshop goes deathly silent. You don't understand the full implications yet, but you can read the room well enough to know this is serious. Very serious. "Those allegations are false," Benedict says flatly. My candles meet guild standards. Every single one. Then you won't mind us verifying that. The second inspector has produced a small brass scale from his bag and is setting it up on the workbench. Guild standard for a common tallow candle is 8 ounces. Minimum. Let's see what yours weigh. Shall we? What follows is excruciating. The inspectors randomly select candles from various batches, some from yesterday, some from last week, some from storage that are waiting to be delivered to customers. Each candle is placed on the scale. Each weight is recorded. And you watch Master Benedict's face grow progressively more drawn with each measurement. Most of the candles are fine 8 ounces, sometimes 8 1/4, well within acceptable range. But 3 candles from an older batch weigh in at 7 3/4 ounces. Just a 1/4 ounce under. Tiny difference. But the inspector's face lights up with grim satisfaction. Underweight, he announces, making a dramatic mark on his tablet. 3 candles, all from the same batch. That's a guild violation, Master Benedict. That's within the margin of error. Benedict protests. Candles lose weight as they cure. Moisture evaporates. Everyone knows. The standard is 8 ounces at point of sale. The inspector cuts him off. Not at point of making. If your candles are losing weight in storage, that's your problem to solve, not your customer's problem to tolerate. The guild exists precisely to prevent craftsmen from selling substandard goods. And here you're witnessing something fundamental about medieval trade. The guild system, in all its bureaucratic glory. Historians still argue whether guilds were primarily protective organizations that maintained quality standards and prevented fraud, or primarily exclusionary cartels that restricted competition and kept prices high. The truth, as usual, is complicated. They were both. And right now, you're seeing the quality control side in action. The inspector continues examining the workshop. He checks that the wicks are the proper material, cotton and linen only, no cheap substitutes. He verifies that the tallow is animal fat, not vegetable oil or other adulterants. He measures the workshop's distance from the nearest residential buildings. Apparently there are rules about that. Something about fire hazards and nuisance smells. He even inspects the storage area to ensure candles aren't being kept in damp conditions that might affect their quality. Every aspect of the business is regulated. How candles are made, what they're made from, how much they should weigh, how they're stored, where workshops can be located, who's allowed to make them, how apprentices are trained. The guild has rules for everything, and breaking those rules means fines. Serious or repeated violations can mean loss of your guild membership, which effectively means loss of your livelihood. Your apprentice records. The first inspector demands, and Benedict produces another book. This one lists you, Peter, and the unfortunate Robert who didn't last. Each entry includes the date of indenture, the terms of apprenticeship, the fees paid, and notes on progress. The inspector scans the entries. This one Robert Blackwell shows termination after only 3 weeks. Why? Unsuitable for the work, Benedict says carefully. He couldn't maintain the standards required. And you refunded the premium his father paid? Most of it, yes, as is customary. The inspector makes a note. And this new one, he glances at you, and you try not to squirm under the scrutiny. Is he properly indentured? Do you have the signed contract? Benedict produces a parchment document from the chest. You catch a glimpse of it, legal language you don't fully understand. But your name is there, and what looks like your father's mark, and Master Benedict's signature, and several wax seals. The inspector examines it thoroughly. 7-year term, standard, room, board, and instruction in exchange for labor. Father paid 3 shillings premium. He looks up. That's low for a chandler's apprenticeship. His father is an old friend, Benedict says, which is technically true, though friend who owed a favor might be more accurate. I agreed to reduce terms. The inspector doesn't seem entirely satisfied, but he can't find anything actually wrong with the arrangement. And you're maintaining proper supervision? Apprentices aren't working unsupervised, aren't being allowed to sell candles on their own? Of course not. Guild rules are followed strictly. This goes on for over an hour. Every record examined, every policy questioned, every aspect of the business scrutinized. Thomas and Peter stand silent throughout, and you follow their lead. Apprentices and journeymen don't speak during guild inspections unless directly addressed. This is master-level business. Finally, the inspectors confer quietly. The lead inspector turns back to Benedict. The underweight candles are a violation. That's a fine of 2 shillings. The neighbor complaints about smoke and smell. We'll investigate those separately. But if we determine you're not maintaining proper fire management, there could be additional penalties. Your apprentice records are acceptable. Your materials and methods are within standards. 2 shillings. You see Benedict's jaw tighten. That's serious money, probably close to what he makes in profit from a full week of candle sales. I accept the fine, Benedict says stiffly. It will be paid to the guild treasurer by week's end. See that it is. The inspectors pack up their scale and tablets. We'll return in 3 months for the next quarterly inspection. I suggest you ensure all your candles are properly weighted by then. Master Benedict. Repeated violations result in doubled fines. They leave, and the workshop exhales collectively. Benedict stands motionless for a moment, staring at nothing, then suddenly kicks the leg of the workbench with enough force that tools rattle. Damned officious bastards, he mutters. 3 candles. 3 candles, a 1/4 ounce light, and it costs me 2 shillings. Were they really underweight? You dare to ask, and immediately regret it when Benedict's glare swings toward you. But he sighs instead of shouting. Probably, yes, that batch was from late summer, made during hot weather. The tallow was softer, harder to build up thickness during dipping. I should have set aside those candles for melting down, but I was rushing to fill an order. He shakes his head. This is what I mean about standards. One mistake, one oversight, and the guild comes down on you like the wrath of God. But isn't that good? You ask, genuinely curious. I mean, keeps people from cheating customers. In theory, yes, Thomas says quietly. In practice, the guild system is complicated. Over breakfast, a thin pottage of oats and yesterday's bread. Thomas explains the reality of guild life. It's your first real education in the political economy of medieval trades, and it's both fascinating and depressing. The guilds started as protective associations. Thomas says, keeping his voice low. Benedict has gone to his house to fetch the money for the fine, leaving the workshop in Thomas's temporary charge. Craftsmen banding together to set standards, prevent fraud, help members who fell on hard times. noble intentions, but over the years, they've become something else. What else? You ask. Control mechanisms. Ways to limit competition. He tears off a piece of bread. Think about it. You can't legally make or sell candles in this city unless you're a guild member. To become a guild member, you have to complete a 7-year apprenticeship, then work as a journeyman for at least 3 years, then pass the guild's examination and pay a substantial entrance fee. That's 10 years minimum, plus money that most people don't have. Peter nods. My father paid 15 shillings for my apprenticeship premium. Master Benedict charged less than usual because my father's a guild member too as a cooper. There's an understanding among guild families. You help each other's children get placed. But if you're not from a guild family, if you're just some peasant's son who wants to learn a trade, good luck affording the premium, and good luck finding a master who'll take you on. So the system perpetuates itself. You say slowly, guild members' children become guild members, and everyone else is locked out. Exactly, Thomas says. Oh, they'll tell you it's about maintaining quality standards. And to be fair, that's part of it. The guild genuinely does prevent some fraud, does maintain some standards, but it also keeps the number of chandlers artificially low, which keeps prices high, which benefits us, the guild members. What about people who try to make candles without guild membership? You ask. Peter laughs. But it's not a pleasant sound. They get shut down. Fast. The guild has legal authority granted by the city council which, by the way, is mostly made up of senior guild members from various trades, so it's all very cozy and self-reinforcing. If the guild inspectors find someone making candles without authorization, they can confiscate their materials, fine them heavily, and if they persist, have them thrown in jail. This is a side of medieval economic life you hadn't considered. You'd vaguely assumed that anyone could just start a business if they had the skills and materials. But no, you need permission. You need guild membership. You need to have served your time, paid your dues, literally and figuratively. The system is designed to control who can enter a trade and how many people can practice it. Is it like this for all trades? You ask. Most of them, Thomas confirms. Bakers, brewers, butchers, blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, dyers, tanners, pretty much every significant craft has a guild, and they all work the same way. Long apprenticeships, strict entrance requirements, heavy regulation of members, and aggressive prosecution of anyone working outside the system. What if you complete your apprenticeship but can't afford the examination fee or the entrance dues? You ask, thinking about your own future. 7 years from now, you'll finish your apprenticeship, but then what? Where will you find the money to become a full guild member? Then you stay a journeyman forever, Peter says bluntly, working for wages, never owning your own workshop, never able to take on apprentices or sell under your own name. That's the trap most of us are in. Thomas has been saving for years to afford his examination. I'm only 4 years into my apprenticeship, so I haven't even started thinking about it yet. But the fee is what, Thomas? 6 shillings? 8. Actually, they raised it last year. Thomas's expression is sour. Plus you have to provide a masterwork, for examination a sample of candles that demonstrates your skill. And the materials for that come out of your own pocket, not your master's. And if you fail the examination, You lose the fee and have to pay again to retake it. I know a journeyman works for Master Philip 3 streets over woes failed twice. Spent 16 shillings on examination fees alone. Never mind the materials. He's 30 years old and still working for wages. The bleakness of this sinks in. You could do everything right, survive the apprenticeship, learn the skills, work hard, and still never make it to master status. Still never have your own business. The system isn't designed to help people succeed. It's designed to maintain a controlled number of masters who face limited competition. Why don't people just refuse? You ask. Why not ignore the guild and do business anyway? Because the guild has real power, Peter says. Legal power, backed by the city authorities. And social power. If you're caught working outside the guild, you'll be fined, possibly jailed. But even worse, you'll be blacklisted. No guild member will do business with you. Can't buy supplies, can't sell goods, can't get credit. You'll be frozen out of the entire economy. And the guilds talk to each other. If the Chandlers blacklist you, the other guilds will hear about it and follow suit. You become untouchable. This is medieval social control at its finest or worst, depending on your perspective. The guilds form an interlocking network of economic power that's nearly impossible to circumvent. They control access to trades, regulate prices and quality, and maintain their authority through a combination of legal muscle and social pressure. It's both more organized and more oppressive than you'd imagined. Master Benedict returns, looking slightly less agitated. Right? He says, clapping his hands. Enough standing around. We've got orders to fill, and now I need to make up 2 shillings somehow. He points at you. Start preparing dipping rods. Peter, get the tallow melting. Thomas, we need to go through our inventory and reweigh every candle. Anything under 8 ounces gets marked for redipping. I won't give those inspectors another excuse to fine me. The rest of the day is tense. Benedict is in a foul mood, snapping at minor errors that he'd normally overlook. The guild inspection has clearly rattled him, and you're beginning to understand why. It's not just about the money, though 2 shillings is painful. It's about the constant surveillance, the knowledge that at any moment, the guild could swoop in and find some violation, real or invented, and extract more fines. How often do they inspect? You ask Peter during a quiet moment. Quarterly, officially, but they can show up anytime if there's a complaint. And there are always complaints, neighbors who don't like the smell, competitors who spread rumors, customers who claim they were cheated. The guild investigates everything, sometimes fairly, sometimes not. Do masters ever fight back? Challenge the guild's authority? Peter looks at you like you've suggested challenging the church. Fight the guild? That's professional suicide. The guild is the profession. Without it, you're nothing. You might as well try to fight the king. And there it is, the fundamental reality of medieval professional life. The guilds aren't optional associations you can join or ignore as you prefer. They're mandatory gatekeepers to economic participation. They control who works, how they work, what they charge, what quality standards they must meet. They're simultaneously your professional credential, your regulatory body, your trade union, and your potential destroyer if you run afoul of their rules. It's a system that would be completely alien to someone used to modern free market capitalism, where, in theory, anyway, anyone can start a business with minimal regulatory burden. but it would be equally alien to someone used to modern labor unions, because guilds represent both workers and owners, and ultimately serve the interests of established masters rather than workers seeking better conditions. You spend the afternoon dipping candles, but the routine feels different now. You're not just making candles, you're making guild-approved, regulation-compliant, quarterly inspected candles. Each dip has to meet standards. Each candle has to weigh enough. Every aspect of the process is governed by rules you barely understand, enforced by inspectors who have real power over your master's livelihood. Welcome to medieval professional life, where your career path is predetermined, your opportunities are controlled, and your success depends as much on navigating guild politics as on actual skill at your craft. At least the candles themselves don't care about any of that. You dip them, they grow thicker, the tallow hardens. Simple, honest, unlike everything else in this system. 2 months into your apprenticeship, Master Benedict calls you aside one morning with an expression you haven't seen before, something between pride and terror. You're ready, he announces, to work with beeswax. Your stomach drops. You've heard the others talk about beeswax in hushed, reverent tones. It's the premium product, the luxury good, the thing that separates common chandlers from elite craftsmen. Tallow candles are for taverns and middle-class homes. Beeswax candles are for churches, nobility, and anyone with enough money to care about actually enjoying their candlelight rather than just tolerating it. Is that wise? You venture. I've only been here 2 months. Normally, no, Benedict admits, normally I wouldn't let an apprentice touch beeswax until their 3rd or 4th year. But we've received a large order from St. Mary's Church, 60 candles for the high altar. Delivery in 2 weeks, and I need every hand available. You'll work under Thomas's direct supervision. You'll do exactly what he tells you, when he tells you, with no improvisation whatsoever. Understood? Understood, Master. Good. Because here's the thing about beeswax. Benedict's expression becomes deadly serious. It costs approximately 20 times what tallow costs. 20 times. One mistake with beeswax is equivalent to ruining 20 tallow candles. We cannot afford mistakes. The church is paying well for this order, but our profit margin is thin because of how expensive the raw materials are. One ruined batch, and we lose money on the entire contract. 20 times more expensive. The number makes your head spin. You've been casually working with tallow for weeks now, spilling occasional drops, making imperfect candles that get melted down and redipped. That's economically viable with cheap tallow. With beeswax, every drop is precious. Every error is a minor catastrophe. Thomas beckons you to the back corner of the workshop, where a small chest sits on a high shelf, well away from the heat and grime of the main work area. He unlocks it with a key that hangs on a cord around his neck. Even the storage of beeswax is secured, and carefully removes several wrapped blocks. The moment he unwraps the first block, you understand why people pay premium prices for beeswax candles. The smell alone is transformative. Instead of the meaty, animal fat reek of tallow, beeswax smells sweet, almost floral, with honey notes and something fresh and clean that seems impossibly out of place in this grimy workshop. The color is beautiful to a warm, golden yellow, not the sickly pale shade of rendered tallow, but something rich and organic, like captured sunlight. This is last year's harvest. Thomas explains, his voice taking on a lecturer's tone. Purchased from a beekeeper in the countryside who supplies several workshops in the city. Good quality. See how uniform the color is? No dark spots. No debris embedded in it. That's important. With tallow, you can render out most impurities. With beeswax, what you buy is what you get. Bad wax makes bad candles, and there's no fixing it. He breaks off a small piece and holds it to the light. Feel it. He instructs, and you take the piece. It's firmer than tallow, less greasy, with a slight tackiness to it. It doesn't leave your fingers feeling coated in oil the way tallow does. Beeswax has a higher melting point than tallow. Thomas continues, about 145 degrees, compared to tallow's 115 or so. That means it's harder to work with, in some ways needs hotter temperatures, which is tricky, but it also means the finished candles hold their shape better. Don't bend or sag in warm weather like tallow candles do. And the burning properties are superior. Cleaner flame, less smoke, better light, pleasant smell. That's why churches want it. Imagine trying to conduct mass with 50 smoky tallow candles making the air gray and smelling like roasted mutton. Historians still argue whether the Catholic Church's preference for beeswax candles was primarily aesthetic, theological, or practical, but the result was the same churches were the primary market for expensive beeswax candles, and their demand drove much of the beeswax trade in medieval Europe. Monasteries often kept their own hives precisely to ensure a supply for their liturgical needs. Right? Thomas says, moving to a smaller cauldron that's been set up away from the tallow pots. First rule of beeswax: never contaminate it with tallow. Even a small amount of tallow mixed in will degrade the quality. Worse smell, worse burning, worse everything. That's why we use dedicated equipment for beeswax. This pot, these paddles, these dipping rods theory only ever used for beeswax. We clean them obsessively between uses. Understood? Understood. Second rule: temperature control is critical. Too hot, and beeswax develops a burned smell that ruins it. Not hot enough, and it won't coat smoothly. We're aiming for about 150 degrees just above the melting point, so it's liquid but not too thin. How do you know when it's 150 degrees? You ask. There are no thermometers in this workshop. No precise measuring instruments of any kind. Thomas smiles slightly. Experience. You learn to judge by the consistency, by how it pours, by how it looks. Watch. He begins melting the beeswax blocks, breaking them into chunks and dropping them into the pot. Underneath, Simon is tending a carefully managed fire, smaller than the ones used for tallow, more controlled. The beeswax melts slower than tallow, transforming from solid blocks to thick liquid gold over the course of 20 minutes. Thomas stirs constantly, testing the consistency by lifting the paddle and watching how the wax drips off it. See how it's still thick, almost syrupy? He says. Too cool. We need it thinner. He has Simon add a bit more fuel. 5 minutes later, there. See how it flows now? Like warm honey. That's right. He produces a set of dipping rods. But these are different from the ones you've been using for tallow. The wicks are finer, whiter pure cotton, bleached to remove any discoloration. Church candles need to be beautiful. Thomas explains. Pure white wicks, smooth golden wax, perfect symmetry, no irregularities, no discoloration, no lumps. He demonstrates the first dip. His movements are slower than with tallow, more careful. He lowers the wicks into the golden liquid, counts to 5 instead of 3, then lifts with perfect steadiness. The wicks emerge coated in a thin, translucent layer of beeswax that gleams in the light. Beeswax sets faster than tallow, Thomas notes, which means shorter wait between dips, which means you can build up a candle faster. But it also means you have less margin for error. With tallow, if you mess up a dip, the wax is soft enough that you can sometimes smooth it out on the next pass. With beeswax, mistakes harden quickly and become permanent. He hands you a dipping rod. Your hands are suddenly sweating, your heart rate elevated. This is 20 times more expensive material than what you've been working with. This is the difference between oops, minor mistake, and Benedict loses significant money on this contract. Relax, Thomas says quietly. Tension makes for shaky hands, which makes for uneven dips. Breathe. Focus. You've done this hundreds of times with tallow. The principles are identical. You approach the pot. The sweet honey smell of the melted beeswax is almost overwhelming. You position the rod. Lower the wicks slowly, steadily into the golden liquid. Count to 5. The wax feels different, somehow more viscous than tallow despite being thinner. Lift. Smooth and controlled. No jerking, no splashing. The wicks emerge coated in translucent gold. It's beautiful. You carry the rod to the drying rack, also dedicated to beeswax only, and hang it with shaking hands. Good, Thomas says. Perfect first dip. See? You can do this. The morning progresses with agonizing slowness. Each dip feels like an examination. You rotate through 12 rods. Thomas is handling the other 12, and Benedict is supervising, watching every movement with hawk-like intensity. The candles grow slowly, each coat of beeswax adding a thin layer of golden beauty. Around the 10th dip, disaster nearly strikes. You're lifting a rod and your foot catches on an uneven spot in the floor. You stumble, the rod tilts, and for one heart-stopping moment you think you're going to drop it directly into the pot, splashing expensive beeswax everywhere. But somehow instinct, luck, terror-induced reflexes you recover. The rod steadies. No beeswax spilled. No candles ruined. Thomas has gone pale. Benedict has his hand over his mouth. Even young Simon has stopped his fire-tending to stare. That, Benedict says slowly, is why apprentices don't normally work with beeswax. One stumble, one moment of clumsiness, that could have been 3 shillings worth of wax wasted. Your hands are shaking now, adrenaline flooding your system. I'm sorry, Master Benedict. But you didn't spill it. He interrupts. You recovered. That's good reflexes. But it's also a reminder this isn't tallow. We can't afford accidents. From now on, when you're working with beeswax, you move slower. You check your footing before every step. You triple-check everything. Clear? Yes, Master. The work continues. By midday, the candles have reached roughly half their final thickness, and they're stunning smooth golden cylinders that seem to glow with inner light even unlit. The white wicks stand straight at their centers, perfectly positioned. These are works of craft bordering on art. The church order specifies decorative work on 20 of the 60 candles. Benedict announces during the brief lunch break. Spiral carving on the surface. That's advanced work. Thomas will do it himself once the candles are complete. But you need to understand how it's done, because eventually you'll be expected to do it yourself. He shows you examples from previous orders candles with delicate spiral patterns carved into their surface, some with braided designs, others with more complex geometric patterns. The carving is done while the beeswax is firm but not fully hardened, using specialized tools that look like tiny knives and awls. The trick is pressure. Thomas explains. Too light, and you barely mark the surface. Too heavy, and you cut through to the wick or crack the candle. You need steady hands and good judgment about the wax's consistency. You watch as Thomas demonstrates on a practice Paisea beeswax candle from an earlier batch that had minor imperfections and couldn't be sold to the church. His hands move with practiced precision, the small knife following a spiral path up the candle's length, cutting just deep enough to create a visible groove without compromising the structure. This takes years to learn properly. He admits, I still mess up, occasionally cut too deep, or the spiral doesn't stay even. But you can't practice on expensive church candles. So most apprentices learn by doing decorative work on their master's personal candles, or on candles that are already flawed and destined for melting down anyway. The afternoon is devoted to finishing the dipping process. By the time the sun is lowering toward evening, you have 12 absolutely beautiful beeswax candles, golden, smooth, perfectly formed, smelling like honey and flowers. Thomas has 12 more. Benedict completed another 12 himself, and the remaining 24 were dipped over the previous 2 days. 60 candles, ready for the church. Well, almost ready. 20 still need their decorative carving, which Thomas will do tomorrow under Benedict's supervision. But the bulk of the work is done, and more importantly, you didn't ruin any of it. Not a single drop of expensive beeswax wasted. No candles so malformed they needed redipping. You did well, Benedict says, and coming from him, this is high praise indeed. Better than I expected for your first time with beeswax. Thomas, your supervision was good. Tomorrow, finish the carved candles. Day after tomorrow, we deliver to St. Mary's and collect payment. That night in the loft, you can't stop thinking about the economics of what you've just participated in. Benedict said the church is paying well, but the raw materials were expensive, and the labor was intensive. 3 full days of work from multiple people. What's the actual profit margin? You posed the question to Thomas, who's lying on his pallet staring at the ceiling. Good question, he says. Let's work it out. 60 candles, maybe 3 pounds of beeswax each. That's 180 pounds total. Beeswax costs about 8 pence per pound, so that's 440 pence of raw materials, which is 6 pounds sterling. You whistle softly. 6 pounds is an enormous amount of money, more than a laborer might earn in a year. The church is paying. Thomas pauses, calculating, probably 10 pounds for the finished candles. Maybe 12 if Benedict negotiated well. So that's 4 to 6 pounds gross profit. But out of that comes our room and board. Simon's wage's not an apprentice. He's hired help, gets paid a few pence per week, the cost of firewood, the cost of workshop maintenance, guild dues, and Benedict's own living expenses. By the time everything is accounted for, Benedict probably nets maybe 2 pounds from this job. That's still good, isn't it? It's decent, but it's also 3 days of intensive work with expensive materials where any mistake would have been costly. Compare that to tallow candles' lower profit per candle, but much higher volume, much lower risk. Benedict probably makes more money overall from his steady tallow business than from occasional prestigious beeswax orders. The beeswax work is as much about reputation as profit. Being able to say you supply St. Mary's Church, that you're trusted with their altar candles, that raises your standing with the guild, attracts higher-class customers, lets you charge more for all your products. It's another lesson in medieval economics. Prestige matters. Reputation matters. The chandler who makes candles for important churches and noble households can charge higher prices for everything, even his ordinary tallow candles, because customers associate his name with quality. The guild system reinforces this. Master chandlers with good reputations get the best apprentices, the best materials, the best contracts. Success compounds. Conversely, failure compounds too. One major mistake ruining an expensive church order, getting caught selling underweight candles, acquiring a reputation for poor quality can spiral into loss of customers, inability to pay guild dues, and eventually loss of guild membership and economic ruin. Do chandlers ever go bankrupt? You ask. Sometimes. Thomas says, there was a master 3 streets over this was before your time, who took on too many contracts at once, couldn't fulfill them all on time, ended up delivering shoddy work, got fined by the guild, lost customers, couldn't pay his debts. Last I heard, he'd left the city entirely, gone to try his luck in a smaller town where maybe his reputation hadn't followed him. His workshop was sold to cover his debts. His apprentices and journeymen had to find new masters midterm, which always looks bad. The fragility of it all is striking. One bad season, one major mistake, one stroke of bad luck, and a master craftsman can lose everything he's built over decades. There's no safety net, no bankruptcy protection, no unemployment insurance, just guild rules, debt obligations, and the unforgiving logic of medieval commerce. You fall asleep thinking about golden beeswax candles, about the steady pressure required to carve spirals without cutting too deep, about the economics of prestige and the compound interest of reputation. Tomorrow, Thomas will finish the decorated candles. And the day after, you'll see what it looks like when Benedict collects payment for his work, the moment when craft transforms into commerce, when beautiful objects become silver coins, when all the heat and smell and tedious labor of the past 3 days converts into profit. If you survive this apprenticeship, you'll understand not just how to make candles, but how to navigate the complex economic and social systems that determine who gets to make them, who gets to sell them, and who gets to prosper from the perpetual human need to push back the darkness. You're 3 months into your apprenticeship when you learn that medieval workshops are essentially tinderboxes waiting for an excuse to explode. It starts innocuously enough. You're stirring a cauldron of tallow routine work, your mind wandering as it always does during repetitive tasks, when a spark from the fire pit beneath the pot jumps upward and lands on a pile of wood shavings near your foot. The shavings are there because Peter was trimming candle bases earlier and swept the debris into a corner instead of disposing of it properly. The spark catches. A small flame appears, barely the size of your thumb. You react without thinking, stomping on it. Your foot crushes the burning shavings, snuffing the flame. The whole incident lasts maybe 3 seconds. Crisis averted. But Master Benedict, who witnessed the entire thing from across the workshop, goes absolutely white. He crosses the room in 4 strides and grabs you by the shoulders, not violently but with an intensity that makes you freeze. Do you understand? He says, his voice low and shaking. That you just prevented us all from burning to death? You blink. It was just a small fire. Master, I put it out. A small fire. He laughs, but there's no humor in it. A small fire in a workshop containing 3 cauldrons of boiling animal fat, barrels of tallow, blocks of beeswax, dried rushes, wooden beams soaked with years of grease, and a dirt floor covered in fat drippings. Do you know what happens when fire reaches a pot of hot tallow? You shake your head mutely. The tallow explodes. It vaporizes into burning droplets that spray everywhere, igniting everything they touch. The wooden building, entirely wooden, remember, goes up like kindling. The fire spreads to the neighboring buildings, which are also wood and thatch, pressed close together because city space is expensive. Within an hour, an entire street block is burning. People die. Families lose everything. And it starts with one tiny spark on some wood shavings that an apprentice was too lazy to clean up properly. He releases you and rounds on Peter. You, outside, out. Peter goes pale but follows Benedict out into the alley behind the workshop. You can hear the master's voice through the walls, not the words, but the tone, which is absolutely scathing. When they return 10 minutes later, Peter's eyes are red and his hands are shaking. New rule. Benedict announces to the entire workshop. At the end of every hour, someone does a complete safety sweep. Every wood shaving swept up and disposed of in the ash pit outside. Every oil drip wiped clean. Every tool checked for grease buildup. Every wick offcut collected. We're not having a fire in this workshop. Ever. Clear? Yes, master. Everyone choruses. But the damage to the day's mood is done. The workshop continues operating. But there's a tension now, an awareness that had been dulled by routine. You find yourself looking at familiar objects with new eyes. The wooden beams overhead, dark with accumulated soot and fat. The straw sleeping pallets in the loft, just above 3 open fires. The barrels of rendered tallow stacked against the wall. The bundles of dry rushes waiting to be turned into cheap rush lights. Everything is fuel. The entire building is essentially a 3-dimensional network of combustible materials, all soaked or coated in flammable substances, heated by open flames that never fully go out. You've been working here for 3 months, and only now does the insanity of it fully register. Has there ever been a workshop fire in the city? You ask Thomas during a quiet moment. His expression darkens. 3 years ago, Master Philip's workshop, the 1-4 streets over where that journeyman who keeps failing his exam works, caught fire during the night. No one knows how it started. Maybe a coal popped out of a fire pit. Maybe a candle tipped over. Maybe spontaneous combustion from oil-soaked rags. Doesn't matter. By the time anyone noticed, the workshop was fully engulfed. Master Philip and his 2 apprentices were sleeping in the loft. They didn't make it out. Your stomach drops. They died? Burned to death, or suffocated from smoke. Take your pick. The workshop and the neighboring cooper's shop were complete losses. The Chandlers Guild had to pay compensation to the cooper's family for their destroyed property, which meant higher guild dues for every master for the next 2 years. And 3 people were dead. Thomas's voice is flat, but you can hear the suppressed emotion underneath. One of the apprentices was my friend. We started our apprenticeships the same year, used to complain together about the work. He was 16. Historians still argue whether medieval urban fires were primarily caused by accidents arson, or negligence. But what's not debatable is that they were terrifyingly common. Wooden buildings, thatched roofs, open fires for cooking and heating and craft work. No organized firefighting services beyond bucket brigades. The conditions were perfect for catastrophic fires. London experienced major fires in 1132, 1212, and of course the Great Fire of 1666. But there were countless smaller fires that never made it into the historical record, destroying workshops and homes and lives with grim regularity. What about fire prevention measures? You ask. Surely there are rules? Oh, there are rules. Thomas says, the city requires workshops with open fires to keep leather buckets of water readily available. We have 3 see them by the door, and there are regulations about chimney maintenance, about clearing flammable materials away from fire pits, about not leaving fires unattended. But regulations don't prevent accidents. People get tired, get careless, get distracted, and then people die. The rest of the day, you're hyper-aware of every spark, every stray ember, every place where flame and fuel might intersect. You watch Simon tending the fires and see not just a boy doing his job, but a boy managing 3 open flames beneath pots of flammable liquid in a wooden building. You watch Peter dipping candles and notice how close the hanging wicks pass to the fire pits when he carries the rods from cauldron to drying rack. You see Thomas trimming finished candles and observe the wax shavings falling to the floor, each one a potential kindling point. Around mid-afternoon, there's a commotion in the street outside shouting, the sound of running feet. Benedict steps out to investigate and returns looking grim. Fire 3 streets over. He announces, baker's shop. The apprentice left bread in the oven overnight and it caught. They're forming bucket brigades now, trying to stop it spreading. Work stops. Without discussion, everyone in the workshop begins securing things banking the fires low, covering the cauldrons, moving the most valuable materials away from the walls. It's pure instinct, collective muscle memory. The fire isn't anywhere near this workshop, but everyone's preparing anyway because they know how fast fire spreads in these cramped medieval streets. You too. Benedict points to you and Peter. Go help with the bucket brigade. Take the leather buckets. Thomas, stay here and mind the workshop. Simon, you're with me. We're going to wet down our roof and walls, just in case. You and Peter grab the heavy leather buckets and run toward the commotion. The scene that greets you is organized chaos. Smoke is billowing from a building 2 streets over, and a line of people has formed from the nearest public well to the fire. You join the line, passing buckets of water forward, receiving empty buckets back, passing them to the person behind you who runs to refill them. It's exhausting work. The buckets are heavy. Leather doesn't hold shape when filled, so they're awkward and sloshing. Your arms burn within minutes. Your back aches from the repetitive twisting motion of receiving and passing. Smoke stings your eyes and chokes your throat. And all around you, people are shouting instructions, crying about lost possessions, praying loudly to various saints. The fire itself is terrifying up close. You can't see much detail through the smoke and the press of bodies, but you catch glimpses orange flames licking from window openings, timbers crashing down inside the structure, sparks spiraling up into the afternoon sky. The heat is intense even from 30 feet away. The bucket brigade works for maybe an hour. Your world narrows to a brutal simplicity. Receive bucket, pass bucket, receive bucket, pass bucket. Your muscles scream. Smoke inhalation makes you cough until your ribs ache. But you keep going because everyone keeps going. Because this is what you do when fire threatens the neighborhood. There's no fire department to call. No professional firefighters with specialized equipment. Just people with buckets, desperately trying to prevent catastrophe. Eventually, the flames die down. The building is a gutted ruin, but the fire didn't spread. The neighboring structures are scorched and smoke-damaged but standing. The bucket brigade breaks up, people stumbling away exhausted, some crying with relief, others grim-faced about what was lost. You and Peter trudge back to the workshop. Master Benedict looks you oversoot-stained, reeking of smoke, exhausted, and just nods. "Good," he says. "That's what neighbors do. Tomorrow, we'll send some candles to the baker as assistance. He lost his entire livelihood today, but at least he's alive." His apprentice. Benedict's expression hardens. His apprentice will be lucky if the guild doesn't expel him entirely for such negligence. That evening, the workshop feels different. Everyone moves more carefully. The fires are watched more closely. The hourly safety sweeps that Benedict instituted after this morning's incident are performed with religious precision. You're all freshly reminded that this craft, this profession, exists in constant negotiation with fire, harnessing it, benefiting from it, but always vulnerable to it turning on you. This is why insurance doesn't really exist for craftsmen. Thomas explains later, lying on his pallet in the loft. Who would underwrite it? Fire risk is too high, too unpredictable. If your workshop burns, you're ruined. You start over from nothing, if you can start over at all. That baker today, he's probably done. Even if the guild doesn't expel his apprentice, his oven is destroyed, his building is uninhabitable, his stock is ash. Unless he has family wealth to fall back on, he's finished. What will he do? You ask. Leave the city? Probably. Try to find work in another town where his reputation hasn't preceded him. Or give up baking entirely and become a laborer. Or starve. Thomas says this matter-of-factly, without emotion. Medieval life offered little sentimentality about economic failure. That's the reality of craft work. You're always one disaster away from losing everything. The next day brings a different kind of fire hazard, the kind that doesn't destroy buildings but destroys bodies. You're stirring a cauldron of tallow, routine work that you've done hundreds of times. When you lean in slightly too close, your sleeve, soaked with yesterday's spilled tallow that you never properly cleaned, catches on the edge of the pot. For one awful moment, the fabric drags through the boiling liquid. You jerk back instinctively, but the damage is done. Scalding tallow has soaked through your sleeve to the skin beneath. The pain is immediate and excruciating, a white-hot burning that makes you gasp and nearly drop the stirring paddle. Water. Thomas snaps, already moving. He grabs your arm and plunges it into the barrel of cold water kept near the workbench. The relief is instant but temporary. Your arm throbs, the pain pulsing with your heartbeat. How bad? Benedict asks, coming over to assess. Thomas carefully rolls up your sleeve. The fabric has adhered to the skin in places, and separating them makes you bite back a cry, and examines the burn. 2nd degree, I'd say. Blistered but not charred. Could be worse. Could be better. Benedict mutters. That's a week of reduced work capacity, at minimum, all because you weren't paying attention to your sleeve proximity. He's not wrong. But the criticism stings worse than the burn somehow. This is your fault carelessness, inattention, the kind of casual mistake that happens when you've done something so many times that you stop thinking about it. And now you'll pay for it in pain and lost productivity. Benedict sends Simon to fetch the barber surgeon from 2 streets over. The man arrives 20 minutes later, examines your arm with professional dispassion, and produces a jar of something that looks disturbingly like lard but smells strongly of herbs. Comfrey and calendula in a sheep fat base. He explains, smearing the ointment over the burn. The initial application is agony, but gradually the pain dulls to a more manageable throb. Keep it covered with clean cloth, change the dressing daily, and try not to use that arm for heavy work. Should heal in a fortnight if it doesn't fester. If it doesn't fester, you repeat. Well, yes, burns fester easily. If you see red streaks running up your arm from the burn site, or if it starts oozing green, come find me immediately. That's blood poisoning, and it's often fatal if not treated aggressively. He says this as casually as someone might comment on the weather. That'll be 3 pence for the consultation and ointment. Benedict pays him, looking pained not about your injury, you suspect, but about the expense. 3 pence is 3 pence, and an injured apprentice is already a loss without adding medical costs to it. For the next week, you work one-armed as much as possible. Simple tasks become difficult. Carrying heavy pots requires help. Stirring requires frequent breaks. Dipping candles with proper symmetry is nearly impossible when you can't grip the rod with both hands. You're reminded viscerally that pre-industrial crafts are physical work, and injuries, even minor ones, have serious consequences. Burns are the most common workshop injury. Peter tells you, showing you a scar on his own forearm from a similar accident 2 years ago. Everyone who works with hot tallow or wax gets burned eventually. It's just part of the trade. The lucky ones get minor burns like yours. The unlucky ones. He trails off, but you can fill in the blanks. Severe burns that cripple hands permanently. Facial burns from exploding tallow pots. Infections that spread and kill. You've seen more scarring around the workshop now that you know to look for it. Thomas has a shiny patch on his hand where hot wax splashed him. Simon has small burn marks on his fingers from tending fires too carelessly. Even Master Benedict has several scars on his forearms, souvenirs of decades in this profession. The medieval workshop offered no OSHA regulations, no workplace safety requirements, no compensation for injuries. You got hurt, you dealt with it, and you hoped it didn't permanently disable you. If it did, well, a craftsman who couldn't use his hands was usually finished in his trade. The guild system had no disability provisions, no support structure for injured workers. You either recovered and returned to work, or you found yourself economically adrift in a society with no safety net. Your arm heals over the next 2 weeks, though the scar remains a permanent reminder to watch your sleeves, to respect the danger inherent in working with boiling liquids day after day. It's a small scar, barely noticeable, but it marks you now as someone who's learned this particular lesson the hard way, joined the unofficial brotherhood of craftsmen who carry fire's signature on their skin. Welcome to the medieval workplace, where safety protocol means trying not to die. Workers' compensation is a concept that won't exist for centuries, and every day you go home with all your fingers intact is a day to be grateful for. For months into your apprenticeship, You're helping Master Benedict prepare an order for delivery when you get your first real lesson in the economics of light, and it's more depressing than you ever imagined. The customer is a merchant's wife, middle class by medieval standards, and she's purchasing a dozen tallow candles for her household. Benedict wraps them carefully in cloth, ties the bundle with cord, and names his price, 18 pence, mistress. 18 pence. For 12 candles. That's a penny and a half per candle. The woman's face tightens, but she counts out the coins without complaint. After she leaves, you do some mental arithmetic that makes your head hurt. Master Benedict, you venture. A laborer makes about 3 pence per day, doesn't he? A skilled laborer, yes, unskilled might make 2. So one of our candles costs half a day's wages for a skilled worker? More or less. Benedict is counting the coins, marking the sale in his ledger. Why? And a candle burns for about 4 hours? Depends on conditions, but yes, approximately. You're quiet for a moment, processing this. So for a common laborer to have light for reading or working after dark costs them half a day's wages per 4 hours of light? Benedict finally looks up, recognizing that you're grasping something important. Now you understand why most people live by daylight and go to bed when it gets dark. Light is expensive, prohibitively expensive for the poor. Those laborers you're talking about, they don't buy candles. They maybe have a rush light if they're lucky, dip some rushes in leftover cooking grease, burns for maybe an hour, produces barely enough light to see your hand in front of your face, or they just sit in darkness. The implications of this hit you like a physical weight. You've spent 4 months learning to make candles, treating them as just objects, just products. But they're not just products, they're recompressed time, packaged hours of life stolen back from darkness. And they're so expensive that the majority of the population simply can't afford them. How many hours does a typical household use candles per day? You ask. Benedict considers. A merchant family like that woman? Maybe they light 2 candles for 3 or 4 hours each evening. 8 candle hours per day. A nobleman's household might use dozens of candles nightly. They can afford to light entire rooms. But a typical craftsman family? Maybe they light 1 candle for an hour or 2 for essential tasks. Spinning thread, doing accounts, whatever can't wait until morning. They conserve light like it's gold, because essentially it is. Historians still argue whether artificial lighting costs were a significant factor in medieval productivity and social life, but the math is undeniable. When light is this expensive, people adjust their entire lives around the sun. Work happens during daylight. Social activities happen during daylight. Reading, writing, skilled crafts that require good visibility, all confined to the hours when the sun provides free illumination. After dark, unless you're wealthy, you mostly just wait for dawn. What about churches? You ask, thinking of the beeswax order you helped with. They use so many candles. Churches are different. They have endowments, donations, wealthy patrons. And liturgical candles aren't optional, theory required for Mass, for Saint Day celebrations, for maintaining the presence lamp. The church probably represents 30% of our business, maybe more. Benedict returns to his ledger. That's why pleasing church clients is so important. They pay well, they order regularly, and they're not price-sensitive the way household customers are. Over the next few weeks, you pay closer attention to the business side of candle making. You notice how carefully Benedict prices different grades of candles. Basic tallow candles like the ones that merchant's wife bought, 18 pence per dozen. Fine tallow candles, rendered multiple times for less smell, 24 pence per dozen. Beeswax candles for wealthy customers, 4 to 6 shillings per dozen, depending on size and decoration. That's 48 to 72 pence. 3 to 4 times the cost of basic tallow. You also notice how Benedict negotiates with customers, adjusting prices based on volume and relationship. A tavern keeper who orders 10 dozen candles monthly gets a better rate than someone buying a single dozen. Guild members get preferential pricing, that informal network of mutual support again. The church pays premium prices but expects premium quality and reliability. And you notice the complaints. Because are there complaints? A customer returns 3 days after purchase, furious. These candles are defective, she announces, slamming them on the workbench. They gutter and drip, smoke terribly, and burn down in half the time you claimed. Benedict examines them calmly. How were they stored, mistress? In my pantry, same as always. And the weather has been unusually warm lately. These candles show signs of having partially melted and rehardened. See the slumping here. And the uneven surface? That's not a defect in manufacture. That's improper storage in excessive heat. Are you calling me a liar? I'm explaining why your candles performed poorly. Benedict's voice remains even, but you can hear the steel underneath. Tallow candles must be kept cool. If they soften in storage, they will burn improperly. This is not a manufacturing defect, and I won't refund your purchase. The woman leaves in a huff, and you hear her muttering about taking this to the guild as she goes. Benedict just sighs. Does she have grounds for a complaint? You ask. No. The guild standards are clear. Candles must perform properly under normal use conditions. If she stored them improperly, that's her problem. But she might complain anyway, and then I'll have to deal with an investigation, even though I've done nothing wrong. He returns to his work. This is part of the business. People don't want to admit their own mistakes, so they blame the craftsmen. You learn to document everything, keep samples from each batch, and maintain detailed records so you can defend your work when challenged. Another day, another complaint, this time about price gouging. A customer insists that Benedict's candles are more expensive than Master Philip's shop 4 streets over. Benedict patiently explains that Philip uses inferior tallow, renders it fewer times, and produces candles that burn faster and smell worse. You pay for quality, Benedict says. If you want cheap candles, buy from Philip. If you want good candles, buy from me. The customer harumphs but ultimately makes the purchase, albeit grudgingly. After he leaves, Benedict turns to you. That's the challenge of this business. We're selling an expensive necessity. People resent the cost, but they can't do without the product. So they complain about prices, accuse us of cheating, and look for any excuse to pay less. Meanwhile, our costs are fixed. The tallow costs what it costs. Fuel costs what it costs. Guild dues are what they are. Our profit margins are thinner than people imagine. How much do you actually profit from a dozen candles? You ask, genuinely curious. Benedict considers whether to share this information, then shrugs. Depends on the type. Basic tallow candles, I sell them for 18 pence per dozen. The tallow costs maybe 6 pence. Wicks another penny. Fuel for rendering and dipping, maybe a penny. That's 8 pence in direct materials. Then there's indirect costs, my guild dues, workshop rent, your room and board, Thomas's wages, equipment maintenance. All told, I probably net about 4 pence profit per dozen basic candles. A bit more for fine tallow, significantly more for beeswax, but the volumes are lower. For pence profit per dozen, 18 pence sale price. That's roughly a 22% profit margin, which sounds decent until you remember that Benedict needs to feed himself and his family, pay guild dues, maintain the workshop, and save for emergencies from that margin. How many candles do you sell in a typical week? You ask. Varies enormously by season. Winter, when nights are long and people need more light, maybe 40 to 50 dozen per week. Summer, when nights are short, maybe 15 to 20 dozen. The business is feast or famine. You do the math. Winter weeks, 50 dozen candles at 4 pence profit per dozen equals 200 pence profit, or 16 shillings and 8 pence. Summer weeks, 20 dozen at 4 pence equals 80 pence profit, or 6 shillings and 8 pence. Average over the year, maybe 12 shillings per week, or roughly £3 per quarter. That's actually a decent income by medieval standard. Skilled craftsmen typically earn somewhere in that range. But it requires constant work. Managing inventory, handling difficult customers, maintaining quality standards, navigating guild politics, and accepting that any mistake or disaster could wipe out weeks or months of profit in an instant. Is it worth it? You ask Benedict one evening, after a particularly difficult day of customer complaints and a guild fee notice that arrived demanding payment for some obscure ceremonial expense. He's quiet for a long moment, cleaning tools with methodical precision. Worth is a complicated word. He finally says, I make a living. I provide light to people who need it. I've built a reputation and a business that might survive me if I'm careful about succession. My children will eat regularly, marry decently, and have opportunities one never had. Is that worth the constant stress, the thin margins, the endless regulation, the customer complaints, and the guild politics? I suppose it must be, because I keep doing it. He looks at you directly. You're asking because you're wondering about your own future, whether 7 years of apprenticeship leads to something worthwhile. You nod, not trusting yourself to speak. Here's what I'll tell you, Benedict says. This isn't glamorous work. You won't get rich not unless you're extraordinarily lucky and politically savvy. You'll work long hours for modest reward. You'll deal with complaints, regulations, competitors who spread rumors, customers who resent paying fair prices for necessary goods. But you'll have a trade. You'll have skills that are always in demand, because people will always need light. You'll have guild membership, which means you're part of a community, for better and worse. And you'll have the satisfaction of making something that matters, even if people don't appreciate it. He returns to his cleaning. Whether that's worth 7 years of apprenticeship and then years of saving to afford your guild examination and possibly more years as a journeyman before you can open your own workshop. That's something only you can decide. But decide based on reality, not on fantasy. This is the reality. That night, lying on your straw pallet in the loft, you think about the economics of light. A candle that costs 18 pence per dozen to buy costs maybe 8 pence in materials to make. The 10 pence difference represents labor, expertise, overhead, risk, and profit, and that candle, burning for 4 hours, costs half a day's wages for a laborer. In a world without electricity, light isn't cheap. Darkness is the default state, and pushing it back requires resources that most people barely have. The wealthy swim in artificial light, reading by candlelight, hosting evening entertainments, extending their productive hours long past sunset. The poor huddle in darkness, their lives constrained by the sun's schedule, unable to afford the premium required to reclaim evening hours. And you, the apprentice chandler, are learning to manufacture this expensive commodity. You're learning to transform animal fat into illumination, cotton cord into light delivery systems, hours of repetitive labor into products that most people can barely afford. You're becoming part of the infrastructure that maintains the medieval class system, where even something as basic as being able to see after dark is a luxury divided along economic lines. Is it worth it? You're still not sure. But at least now you understand what the question really means. It's not about whether the work is pleasant or the hours reasonable or the profit margins adequate. It's about whether you can build a life within a system that's simultaneously essential and exploitative, protective and restrictive, community-oriented and exclusionary. Welcome to medieval economics, where light itself is rationed by price, where the products you make with your own hands remain largely unaffordable to people like you, and where success means navigating a complex web of guild regulations, customer expectations, thin profit margins, and the constant knowledge that one disaster fire, theft, scandal, economic downturn could erase everything you've worked for. The candles you dip today will burn in homes you'll never enter, providing light for people who'll never think about where their candles came from or what they actually cost to make. That's the chandler's paradox. You spend your days making light, and most of it flows away to illuminate other people's lives. 5 months into your apprenticeship, you discover that medieval business is basically 1 part craft, 1 part politics, and 2 parts petty drama, and the drama is somehow the most dangerous part. It starts when a new chandler opens a workshop 3 streets over. His name is Jeffrey. He's newly arrived from another city with proper guild credentials and apparently enough capital to set up an impressive operation. Within a week, rumors are spreading through the neighborhood. Jeffrey uses superior imported tallow. Jeffrey has mastered a revolutionary dipping technique. Jeffrey's candles burn twice as long as everyone else's. Jeffrey is offering introductory discounts to attract customers. Master Benedict hears these rumors, and his face goes through a complicated series of expressions: dismissiveness, concern, irritation, and finally a kind of weary resignation. So it begins. He mutters. So what begins? You ask. Competition. The guild allows it, supposedly to maintain quality through market pressure. In reality, it just means we spend half our energy undermining each other instead of actually making candles. You assume he's exaggerating. He's not. Within days, you're dispatched on what Benedict euphemistically calls market research, but which is actually just spying. Your mission: visit Jeffrey's workshop under the pretense of seeking employment, observe his methods, report back on his prices and techniques. You feel ridiculous and vaguely criminal doing this, but you obey. Jeffrey's workshop is indeed impressive newer equipment, a slightly larger space, and the man himself is charismatic and smooth-talking. He shows you around freely, apparently not suspecting espionage. See this? He indicates his dipping setup. I use a double cauldron system, inner pot for the wax, outer pot with water to regulate temperature. Prevents burning, ensures even consistency. Revolutionary technique I learned in Bruges. It's actually a clever system. You make mental notes while nodding appreciatively. And my tallow, Jeffrey continues proudly, comes from a supplier who specializes in mutton from young sheep. Better quality fat, cleaner burning, costs more, but I can charge premium prices because customers notice the difference. You report all this back to Benedict, who listens with increasing grimness. Double cauldron system, he repeats. That's not revolutionary, that's just expensive. Requires more fuel, more equipment, more space, and premium mutton tallowies. Slightly better, but not enough to justify the cost unless you're targeting wealthy customers exclusively. Is he a threat? Thomas asks, looking worried. Potentially. Benedict drums his fingers on the workbench. If he captures the high-end market, that's fine. There's enough wealthy customers for multiple Chandlers. But if he starts undercutting us on common candles while claiming superior quality, we'll lose our bread and butter business. Over the next week, Benedict implements countermeasures that would make a modern marketing executive proud or appalled, depending on perspective. He starts his own rumor campaign, making sure certain key customers hear that Jeffrey's revolutionary techniques are actually just expensive window dressing. He offers loyal customers special bulk discounts to lock in their business. He makes a point of delivering orders personally so he can subtly disparage the new competition. I hear Jeffrey's candles look beautiful. He tells one merchant, but they say the wicks he uses are too thick, waste of good tallow. Really? Of course. I wouldn't know personally. I'm sure he means well, being new to the city and not fully understanding our local preferences yet. It's masterfully done technically, not saying anything false, but leaving the impression that Jeffrey is an outsider who doesn't understand the market. The merchant nods thoughtfully and renews his usual order with Benedict. You're witnessing medieval business competition in action, and it's surprisingly nasty. No advertising regulations, no truth in marketing laws, no legal recourse for defamation. Just rumor, innuendo, and strategic relationship management. Historians still argue whether medieval guild systems actually promoted healthy competition or primarily functioned as vehicles for established members to protect their market positions. But from where you're standing, it looks a lot like the latter. The situation escalates when Jeffrey responds with his own campaign. Suddenly, you start hearing rumors about Benedict's workshop. His candles are underweight. Didn't he just get fined for that? His tallow comes from questionable sources. He works his apprentices too hard, violates guild regulations, cuts corners on quality. Most of these rumors are false or exaggerated, but they spread anyway because scandal is entertaining and people love drama. Benedict comes home from market one day looking like he wants to murder someone. Jeffrey's been telling people I buy tallow from illegal slaughterhouses. He announces that I'm using diseased animal fat to save money. Completely false, malicious nonsense. Can you sue him for defamation? You ask, thinking there must be some legal recourse. I could try, but I'd have to prove he started the rumor, which is nearly impossible. And even if I could, the guild court process takes months and costs money I'd rather spend on actual business. Meanwhile, the damage to my reputation is happening now. Benedict paces angrily. This is what happens when new Chandlers arrive. Instead of competing on quality and service, they go straight to character assassination. Thomas looks troubled. This could get worse before it gets better. When Master Philip had his competition problems 5 years ago, someone broke into his workshop and contaminated his tallow with lamp oil. Ruined 3 weeks of inventory. Sabotage? You're shocked. That's criminal. It's also unprovable. Thomas says, "Who's going to admit to it?" The guild investigated. Found nothing. Everyone knew who did it. But without proof, nothing happened. Except Master Philip lost significant money and the competitor drove him out of business within the year. The implications are chilling. You're working with valuable materials in a workshop that's locked at night, but not exactly secure, medieval locks being what they are. If someone wanted to sabotage Benedict's business, there are dozens of ways to do it. Contaminate the tallow, start a fire, steal inventory, damage equipment, spread rumors to the guild inspectors that would trigger investigations. Benedict must be thinking the same thing because he announces new security measures. From now on, someone sleeps in the workshop every night. We'll rotate Thomas one night, me the next, Peter after that. You're too new. You'd sleep through an intrusion. This strikes you as both reasonable and depressing. You're essentially posting guards against fellow guild members who theoretically should be professional colleagues. Medieval business community. Everyone. The Cold War with Geoffrey continues for weeks. He keeps offering discounts and spreading rumors. Benedict keeps defending his reputation and locking in loyal customers. The rest of the Chandlers in the area watch with interest, some offering subtle support to Benedict, others staying neutral, a few seemingly hoping both competitors weaken each other enough to create opportunities. Then someone steals 3 blocks of Benedict's beeswax. It happens on a Tuesday night. Thomas is doing his rotation sleeping in the workshop, but he's exhausted from a long day and sleeps more heavily than usual. Sometime in the early morning hours, someone picks the lock on the back door, enters quietly, opens the locked chest where beeswax is stored, and makes off with 3 blocks, roughly 9 pounds, worth about 6 shillings. Thomas wakes to find the chest open and the beeswax gone. He's devastated, convinced he's failed in his duty. Benedict is furious not primarily at Thomas, but at the thief, at Geoffrey, whom he immediately suspects, at the whole situation. 6 shillings. Benedict keeps repeating. That's 2 weeks of profit. Gone. And I can't prove anything. Can't accuse Geoffrey without evidence. Can't get the guild involved without proof. Can't even recover the loss because no one's going to compensate me for my own security failure. You all spend the day discussing theories. Was it Geoffrey? One of his apprentices acting on instructions or independently? A third party taking advantage of the known rivalry? Random theft by someone who knew Chandlers keep valuable beeswax? The guild is notified, required by regulations, for any significant theft, but their investigation is perfunctory. They note the loss in their records, remind Benedict to maintain better security, and move on. No suspects identified, no recovery made, no justice served. This is the real danger of competition. Thomas tells you quietly, it's not just about market share and prices. It's about creating an environment where people are motivated to destroy rather than create. Geoffrey probably didn't steal that beeswax himself, but the tensions he's created make theft more likely. People see conflict and opportunity. The psychological toll on the workshop is significant. Everyone's paranoid now. Benedict has installed a better lock and added a crossbar to the back door. Someone always sleeps in the workshop, and that person is expected to wake at any unusual sound. Inventory is counted daily. Relationships with suppliers and customers are scrutinized. Could anyone be feeding information to Jeffrey? It's exhausting, this constant vigilance. You're spending mental energy on security that should be going into actually making candles. Benedict is irritable, snapping at minor mistakes. Peter is jumpy, convinced every customer who asks detailed questions is a spy. Even young Simon seems affected, looking nervously at shadows. Then, mysteriously, things calm down. Jeffrey stops spreading rumors. The undercutting stops. His aggressive discounting ends. You hear through the neighborhood gossip network that Jeffrey had his own Problemsa Major order rejected by a church for quality issues. Some kind of dispute with his tallow supplier. Whispers about financial difficulties. The competitive pressure eases. Benedict's business stabilizes. The theft is never solved. But no further incidents occur. Life in the workshop returns to its normal rhythm of hot tallow, repetitive dipping, customer complaints, and guild inspections. That's how it goes. Benedict reflects one evening. A new competitor arrives full of ambition and capital. They make aggressive moves, disrupt the market, cause drama and stress for everyone. Then reality sets in. The margins are thin, the work is hard, customers are demanding, the guild is restrictive, and maintaining quality at competitive prices is difficult. The aggressive newcomer either settles down and becomes just another chandler competing normally, or they fail and leave. Either way, the crisis passes. Until the next newcomer arrives, Thomas adds, until the next one. Yes. You're learning that medieval business isn't really about free market competition in any modern sense. It's about navigating a complex social system where your success depends on reputation, relationships, guild politics, and your ability to defend your position against rivals who may or may not play by any recognizable rules. The guild supposedly regulates all this, maintaining standards and preventing fraud, but in practice, they're often slow, ineffective, and more concerned with collecting dues than with justice. Historians still argue whether the medieval economy was primarily cooperative or primarily competitive, but you're living the realities both, simultaneously, in ways that create constant tension. Chandlers need each other for guild strength and mutual support, but they're also competing for the same customers and limited market share. Cooperation is necessary, but trust is dangerous. Alliances form and dissolve based on immediate interests. Today's ally is tomorrow's competitor, and next week's saboteur. The theft of the beeswax is never solved. Jeffrey's workshop continues operating 3 streets over, no longer aggressively competitive but still there, still taking business that might have been Benedict's. The lost 6 shillings is absorbed as a cost of doing business. The better lock remains on the back door. The nightly guard rotation continues. And you understand now that surviving as a medieval craftsman requires more than just skill at your trade. You need political savvy, social intelligence, paranoia in the right measure, allies you can trust mostly, and the ability to project strength even when you feel vulnerable. You're not just learning to make candles. You're learning to survive in an economic ecosystem that's part marketplace, part battlefield, and part theater where reputation and perception matter as much as actual quality and service. Welcome to medieval business, where your biggest threat isn't market forces or changing technology. but the guy 3 streets over who's spreading rumors about your tallow while possibly planning to steal your beeswax. Where the guild that's supposed to protect you mostly just collects fees and performs quarterly inspections. Where success means making good products, yes, but also managing gossip, cultivating customers, deterring theft, and navigating rivalries that can turn destructive at any moment. The candles you make burn clean and steady, providing honest light. If only the business of making them was equally straightforward. 6 months into your apprenticeship, you work your first overnight shift, and it's during this long, dark night that you finally understand why you or anyone really absolutely wouldn't survive this profession in the long term. The overnight shift happens because St. Catherine's Church has placed a rush order. They need 80 candles for a special feast day celebration, and they need them in 3 days. Normal production can't meet that deadline, which means working through the night to catch up. Benedict announces this with grim determination rather than enthusiasm. No one is happy about it, but church orders pay well and refusing them damages your reputation irreparably. We'll work in shifts. Benedict explains. Thomas and I will take the first shift, sunset until midnight. You and Peter will take midnight until dawn. Simon is too young for overnight work. Will do extra day hours to compensate. Everyone clear? You nod, trying not to show your apprehension. You've been working long days, but overnight is different. Your body isn't designed for it. Medieval people aren't designed for it. You live by the sun schedule because you have no choice, and fighting that rhythm is asking for trouble. The day proceeds normally until evening, when you and Peter eat a large meal fuel for the night ahead. Thomas advises and then try to sleep for a few hours before your midnight shift. Sleep doesn't come easily. The loft is still warm from the day's heat. You're anxious about the upcoming work, and your body is confused about why you're trying to sleep when the sun only just set. You manage maybe 2 hours of fitful dozing before Peter shakes you awake. Midnight, he says quietly, "Our turn." Below in the workshop, Thomas and Benedict have made significant progress. The dipping rods are already in rotation, the candles perhaps 1/3 complete. The fires are burning steady, casting jumping shadows on the walls. The 2 men look tired, Benedict especially, his face drawn and haggard in the firelight. Keep the rotation going, Benedict instructs, showing you which rods are ready for the next dip. Maintain the tallow temperature, test it regularly. Don't let it get too hot or too cool. Feed the fires every hour. If anything goes wrong, wake me immediately. I'll be sleeping in the back room. He pauses. And stay alert. Working tired is when accidents happen. Then he and Thomas climb the ladder to the loft, leaving you and Peter alone in the workshop with the fires and the darkness and the endless dipping rotation. For the first hour, it's almost pleasant. The workshop is peaceful in the night silence. No customers interrupting, no Benedict scrutinizing your technique, no street noise filtering in. Just you and Peter and the hypnotic rhythm of dip and hang, dip and hang. The tallow bubbles gently in the cauldron. The candles grow slowly, steadily, but by the second hour, fatigue sets in. Your body knows this is wrong. You should be sleeping. Every instinct is screaming that you shouldn't be doing physical labor in the middle of the night. Your movements become sluggish. Your mind wanders. You catch yourself nearly dropping a dipping rod and jerk back to alertness. Heart pounding. How do people do this regularly? You ask Peter, who's looking equally exhausted. They don't. Mostly, overnight work is rare, reserved for emergencies like this. Some professions require it bakers start work around 3 in the morning to have bread ready by dawn. And night watchmen obviously work nights, but most crafts operate during daylight. He stifles a yawn. The human body isn't meant for this. We're sun creatures. By the third hour around 3 in the morning, you estimate, though you've lost precise track of time, you're experiencing something close to delirium. The workshop has taken on a dreamlike quality. The shadows from the fires seem to move independently. The smell of tallow is overwhelming, nauseating. Your arms move through the dipping motions automatically, but your mind has detached, floating somewhere else entirely. You find yourself thinking strange thoughts. How many candles have you dipped in 6 months? Thousands, probably. How many will you dip over a 7-year apprenticeship? Tens of thousands. How many if you actually become a chandler and work this trade for decades? Hundreds of thousands. Millions. Maybe. The same motion, repeated until it's worn grooves into your very soul. Stay awake, Peter warns, noticing you swaying slightly. Falling into a fire pot would be bad. Right? Fire pots, hot tallow, sharp tools. All the hazards of the workshop are still present, but your ability to navigate them safely is severely compromised by exhaustion. This is how accidents happen. This is how that apprentice at Master Philip's workshop probably died, working tired, working careless. One mistake compounding into catastrophe. Around 4 in the morning, the worst hour of the night, you experience something that will haunt you for the rest of your time in this workshop. You're carrying a dipping rod from the cauldron to the drying rack, moving on autopilot, when you simply lose time. You blink, and suddenly you're standing at the rack with no memory of walking there. You've completed the action unconsciously, your body following patterns so deeply ingrained that your conscious mind wasn't required. It's terrifying. What if you'd stumbled? What if there'd been something in your path? What if you'd needed to react to a problem? Your body was operating independently, and you have no memory of those precious seconds. Peter, you say quietly, I think I'm too tired to do this safely. He looks at you, and in the firelight, his face is gaunt, shadows under his eyes deep as bruises. We all are, but the work has to be done. The church order has to be filled, so we keep going. His voice is flat, defeated. This is the job. Sometimes the job breaks you a little bit. You recover, and then it breaks you again. And eventually, years from now, you'll look back and realize it's broken you in ways that never fully healed. It's the most honest thing anyone has said to you during this apprenticeship. Not Benedict's pragmatic explanations, not Thomas's careful instructions, but Peter's exhausted confession that this work damages people and everyone just accepts it as normal. The night drags on. 5 o'clock arrives, then 5:30. The sky outside the small workshop windows is still black, but you know intellectually that dawn is approaching. Your body doesn't care. It wants sleep with an intensity that borders on physical pain. Around 6 o'clock, the quality of darkness outside changes. Not lighter yet, but different, that particular pre-dawn shift when night is ending but day hasn't begun. It's the strangest time, the threshold time, and working through it feels transgressive somehow, like you're violating natural law. Finally, blessedly, the workshop door opens and Benedict enters, looking somewhat restored by his few hours of sleep. He surveys the work. The candles have grown substantially, maybe 2/3 complete now, and nods approval. Good work. You've kept the rotation going, maintained temperature, no obvious disasters. Peter, you can stop now. He looks at you. 1 more hour. I'll take over after that, and you can sleep until noon. 1 more hour. It sounds both impossibly long and manageable. You're so tired that time has lost meaning anyway. What's 1 more hour in this eternal night? Benedict and Peter work together for a while. Then Peter climbs the ladder to collapse on his pallet. You continue dipping, your movements now purely mechanical. Benedict works beside you, and you notice even he looks worn, despite his sleep. This profession ages people. The constant heat, the chemical exposure from tallow fumes, the physical strain, the stress, the occasional overnight emergency, it all accumulates, wearing down bodies and spirits with relentless patience. 7 o'clock arrives. Dawn has properly begun, gray light filtering weakly through the smoke-stained windows. The fires look different in daylightless dramatic, more squalid. The workshop looks different too, showing its grime and wear in the unforgiving morning light. Go sleep, Benedict finally says. You've earned it. You climb the ladder on shaking legs, collapse onto your straw pallet without even removing your boots, and fall into a sleep so deep it's almost like death. You wake around 2 in the afternoon, disoriented and aching. Your muscles are stiff from the night's work. Your head throbs from the combination of exhaustion, tallow fumes, and disrupted sleep rhythm. You feel like you've aged 10 years overnight. Below in the workshop, work continues. Thomas and Benedict are maintaining the rotation. The church candles are nearly complete, just a few more dips and they'll be ready for final trimming and inspection. The overnight emergency has been managed successfully. But at what cost? You think about this over the following days as your body recovers from the overnight shift. You think about Peter's words, the job breaks you a little bit, and then it breaks you again. You think about all the ways this profession damages people. The burns that scar hands and arms. The respiratory problems from constant smoke and fume inhalation. The joint damage from repetitive motions. The exhaustion from long hours and occasional overnight work. The stress from guild politics, customer complaints, economic uncertainty, and competition. You think about Master Benedict, maybe 45 years old, looking 60, his hands permanently stained and scarred, his lungs probably compromised by decades of breathing tallow smoke. You think about Thomas, still young but already showing signs of the wear, the slight stoop in his shoulders, the perpetual tired look in his eyes, the cynicism that comes from understanding exactly what his future holds. You think about the economics of it all, the thin profit margins, the high costs, the expensive products that most people can't afford, the system that makes light itself a luxury commodity, rationed by price, available primarily to those who need it least. The guild structure that controls access to the trade while providing questionable protection in return. The competition that breeds paranoia and occasional sabotage. The customers who resent paying fair prices for necessary goods. And you think about the 7 years stretching ahead of you. 7 years of this heat, the smell, these repetitive motions. 7 years of guild regulations and customer complaints and thin profit margins. 7 years of learning to transform animal fat into light while your own life happens in the shadows, dictated by other people's need for illumination. After the 7 years, if you survive them, then you're a journeyman, working for wages, saving money for a guild examination you might never afford, hoping to someday maybe peep in your own workshop where you can experience all these same problems but now as an owner rather than an employee. The responsibility, the stress, the economic uncertainty, all yours to manage forever. Is it worth it? You still don't know. But you know now, with bone-deep certainty, that you wouldn't survive this in the long term. Not really survive. Not with your health intact. Not with your optimism preserved. Not with your body unmarked by burn scars and your lungs clear of tallow smoke and your spirit unbroken by the relentless grind of it all. The medieval chandler's workshop is a machine for converting human life into light. You feed it your time, your health, your youth, your energy, and it produces candles that burn in other people's homes while you sit in your soot-stained workshop, surrounded by the smell of rendered animal fat, counting coins that barely cover your costs, knowing that tomorrow you'll do it all again. You wouldn't survive this. Nobody really survives it. They just endure it, day after day, year after year, until either they achieve some measure of success that makes the suffering seem worthwhile, or they don't, and they end their lives broken and poor with nothing to show for decades of labor except scarred hands and compromised lungs and the knowledge that they spent their entire existence making light for other people to use. The candles you made during that overnight shift are delivered to St. Catherine's Church. They'll burn during the feast day celebration, providing beautiful golden light for the service. The congregation will pray by their light, sing hymns, receive communion, and never once think about the exhausted apprentice who dipped those candles at 3 in the morning while fighting to stay conscious, while his body screamed for sleep, while his soul quietly cracked under the weight of understanding exactly what his chosen profession demands. Welcome to the medieval chandler's workshop. You came here 6 months ago thinking you'd learn a trade. Instead, you've learned that surviving medieval labor means accepting damage as normal, exhaustion as standard, danger as routine, and exploitation as inevitable. You've learned that the simple candle, that thing everyone takes for granted, costs more than money. It costs pieces of the people who make it, burned away slowly like wax feeding a flame, consumed in the service of pushing back darkness for people who'll never know their names. You wouldn't last a day in this workshop, not if lasting means emerging unchanged, undamaged, with your health and optimism intact. But you've lasted 6 months, and you'll probably last the full 7 years, because what choice do you have? You'll endure the heat and the smell and the repetitive strain and the occasional overnight emergency and the burns and the smoke inhalation and the guild politics and the thin profit margins and the customer complaints and the competition and the paranoia and the exhaustion. You'll endure it because that's what people did. That's what they do. They endure the unendurable because the alternative is starvation or worse. And at least this trade offers the possibility, however slim, of eventually building something stable. But you won't survive it unscathed. Nobody does. The workshop will mark you permanently, in ways visible and invisible. And years from now, if someone asks you about your time as a chandler's apprentice, you'll tell them the truth. It was necessary. It was valuable. It was honest work producing necessary goods. And it slowly, steadily, day by day and candle by candle, broke something inside you that never fully healed. That's the real reason you wouldn't last a day in a medieval candle workshop. Not because the work is physically impossible, though it's hard, but because truly understanding what the work costs, what it demands, what it takes from you over years and decades, that understanding breaks something essential, some capacity for innocence, maybe, or hope, or the belief that hard work automatically leads to prosperity and satisfaction. The candles burn bright and steady, their light honest and clean. If only the same could be said for the lives of the people who make them. And now, as these final images of flickering candlelight fade into the darkness, let your breathing slow. The heat of the workshop dissolves into the coolness of your room. The smell of tallow fades away. The ache in your arms from endless dipping softens into the comfortable weight of your blankets. You've journeyed through 6 months of medieval labor, witnessed the hidden costs of something as simple as a candle, and now it's time to let that world drift away into sleep. Those apprentices in that workshop, they continued their work, day after day, their hands moving through familiar motions even as we've left them behind. Their candles burned for people who never knew their names, provided light for homes and churches and taverns across the medieval city, while the chandlers themselves worked on in relative obscurity, their craft essential and their lives difficult and their perseverance quietly remarkable. But that's their story now, fading into the gentle darkness. Your story is softer, the story of drifting off to sleep, breathing slowly, letting the weight of fatigue pull you down into deep, peaceful rest. No more workshops to survive, no more tallow to render, no more guild inspections or overnight shifts or economic anxieties. Just the simple, blessed relief of sleep. The candles burn out. The fires bank down to glowing embers. The workshop grows dark and quiet. And you, having witnessed what you wouldn't survive, can rest easy knowing you're here, now, in this moment, safe and warm and drifting gently toward dreams. Sleep well. Let the medieval world fade. Tomorrow will be easier than anything those apprentices faced.